It would be fair to say our great nation has been infected with a virulent, symbolical tapeworm called the Internal Revenue Service. This type of parasitic worm in biology is identified in the class called flatworm phylum. This invading organism has 20,000 species, and when humans are infected by this extremely harmful and toxic hostile flatworm, the result is fatal. Hello, and welcome to WordWise. I'm your host, Kit, and today I'll be discussing how the American public can dismantle the IRS. This self-published book is the work of Lori Daybell's father, Barry Cox. Lori Daybell is about to stand trial for the attempted M of Brandon Boudreaux. Today is May 28th, 2025, just in case you're watching this a year from now and wondering what's going on. She's just been convicted for conspiracy to commit first-degree M in the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, and she has one more trial to go. I didn't intend to make a video on this book when I started reading it. I was sick with the flu, and I impulsively decided to read the free preview on Kindle. Unfortunately, the book is only available as an ebook. But I kept reading because I started to see a lot of Lori in Barry's writing, and I think we can gain some really interesting insights into Lori's current behavior by examining this book. In fact, I think I have finally found a solid answer to the question, why was Lori so attracted to Chad? I think I figured it out. But we're going to have to take a long walk through a very strange part of society in order to reach that answer. My videos usually begin with a brief history and then we dive right into the text, because I'm not a fan of long openings. But today I need to put this book in context, and it's going to be a long, heavy, at times inappropriately funny video in which we talk about a very ugly slice of America. So I'm going to subdivide this video into sections. First, we'll spend 15 or 20 minutes talking about tax protesters and sovereign citizens. Second, I'll tell you what we know about Barry personally. Third, I'll spend the bulk of the video going through Barry's book. And fourth, I'll connect everything we've learned to explain how all of this fits together and informs our understanding of what Lori is doing in court. By the way, I did make a video in which I got tipsy and read the entirety of Chad's sensual masterpiece, Loinfire. I had to age restrict it, so YouTube might not have recommended it to you even if you're a subscriber, but it's on my channel and my Chad Daybell playlist. Please enjoy. And before we dive in, a big welcome to all the new visitors. If this is the first video of mine that you've seen, you picked a doozy. Let's do it. We can't understand this book, or Barry and Lori, without understanding the subculture of which Barry is a part. And I'm not talking about being LDS. I'm talking about being a sovereign citizen. If you've never heard of sovereign citizens, often abbreviated as sovcits, that's okay, I'm going to explain. The sovereign citizen movement was born out of tax protesting. Barry describes himself as a tax resistor at one point in this book, but a tax resistor is someone who refuses to pay taxes out of a moral opposition to the government's policies, most often because they're pacifists who don't want their tax money used to pay for the military. Barry, however, doesn't want to pay taxes because he's bought into a conspiracy theory that says the laws establishing the government's right to tax people is invalid. We'll hear plenty more about that later, but first I want to explain how this conspiracy theory came about and how it's manifesting today. It could be argued that this country was founded out of a tax protest. That's a wild oversimplification, but it's something you'll hear tax protesters bring up all the time, as if refusing to pay taxes is somehow deeply, beautifully American. But the modern tax protest movement began during the Depression and really found its footings in the 1960s. And from the start, it has been deeply interwoven with the radical right, racism, anti-Semitism, and violence. In 1954, a man named Arthur Julius Porth sued the federal government to get his income taxes back, claiming that paying taxes violated his 13th Amendment rights against being enslaved. Knowing what actual enslaved people in this country went through, it's an offensively stupid argument, But Porth was just that kind of guy. He's most famous for writing, "I plead the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States" across the top of his blank tax forms and mailing them in every year from 1962 until his death 31 years later. Many others followed suit, to the point that these returns were labeled Porth returns, or Fifth Amendment returns, by the IRS. In fact, Barry Cox tried to make the same argument in one of his legal filings. I'm going to read from an amazing book called The Tea Next Door: The Militia Movement and the Radical Right, the title of which ought to give you a preview of the direction this story is going in. The book is by Daniel Levitas, and the blurb on the front cover is from Coretta Scott King, who says it should be required reading for everyone. I agree. I'm a fairly well-educated American, and I've never heard 90% of this history. By the mid-1960s, Porth was referring to himself as a tax consultant, and he had broadened his arguments against the IRS. In addition to claiming that taxation was a form of slavery, Porth cited 26 other constitutional provisions that he alleged were violated by the IRS. Among other things, he said the money he earned was not income because Federal Reserve notes were not redeemable in gold or silver. Porth also claimed that the income tax violated Fourth Amendment prohibitions against illegal search and seizure, as well as the Fifth Amendment ban on taking property without due process and just compensation. While the other tax protesters had pursued similar arguments, few did so as aggressively as Porth, whose battle with the IRS turned him into a right-wing celebrity. He cashed in on his status by publishing a manual for tax protesters and lecturing across the country. He also won fame as a tax rebel by his commitment to confrontation. Porth was not a good person. He was an anti-Semite and, frankly, an agitator. He liked the attention. And Porth was creative. He had the ability to read and understand just enough law that he could twist it, like a clown making balloon animals, until it resembled something that people who weren't as smart as he was could buy as truth. And this warped logic is something that he contributed to the radical right and something that has carried down to modern times. We see it throughout Barry's book. For example, take his invoking the Fifth Amendment on his tax returns. Does that really make sense? No. But it kind of sounds like it almost could, and that's enough for A.J. Porth. Porth also understood the power of martyrdom. He demanded that he be prosecuted for his refusal to pay taxes. He actually wrote to the government and said, "I'm committing crimes, why aren't you prosecuting me?" After which he was tried and convicted. This gave him immense clout among people who didn't want to pay taxes. In fact, followers of his harassed the prison and its warden to the point that they granted Porth parole after he'd served only 75 days of his 5-year sentence. Prior to Porth's highly publicized battle, most tax protesters had been content to publish broadsides or agitate politically for tax repeal. But Porth established a much more personal and aggressive standard for tax resistance, and he inspired others to do the same. Change is going to become effective when the people demand their rights. You're not going to get those rights by electing a new party, politically wise. You're not going to get those rights by joining some group and all of you getting together and pushing the braver ones out to the front. You're going to get those rights when you as individuals demand your individual constitutional rights, he said in 1969. As soon as Porth became famous, he attracted the interest and support of a much scarier person named William Potter Gale. Bill Gale had been converted to a religion called Christian identity that formed out of a theory known as British Israelism. I remember the first time I ran into this concept. I was reading a bio on Wikipedia, and it said this man believed in British Israelism. I said to Gosha, "What is that?" He said he didn't know. We both expressed confusion, and I clicked the link to read about it. British Israelism, also called Anglo-Israelism, is a pseudo-historical belief that the people of Great Britain are genetically, racially, and linguistically the direct descendants of the 10 lost tribes of ancient Israel. Needless to say, that was not what I was expecting. The details of how this works seem to vary from one believer to the next, but the basic idea is that modern Jewish people are descended from 2 of the 12 tribes, and the other 10 tribes of ancient Israel moved to the British Isles. Does this theory make sense? Absolutely not. It's outlandish, and it has no historical, genetic, or linguistic evidence to support it. But some people really want to believe it, and Daniel Levitas coined a brilliant phrase to explain why. He calls it covenant envy. There are a number of Christians, perhaps a lot, who just can't handle the fact that they aren't the people described in the Old Testament. They aren't God's chosen people. And for reasons I don't quite understand, being part of the new covenant described in the New Testament just isn't enough for them. Most of these people are obsessed with bloodlines, and they seem to feel like the fact that their ancestors converted to Christianity is somehow insufficient compared to people who were direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. So they invented this cockamamie theory that they're really Jews, the true Jews. Interestingly, Barry Cox shares this feeling that conversion is less meaningful than descent. He apparently liked Chad Daybell more than Lori's other husbands because he was born LDS rather than converting, which is ironic given that Barry himself is a convert. Anyway, British Israelism has been around for centuries. Covenant envy isn't new, and I think it's one of the causes of anti-Semitism. Christian identity was born out of it, but for the adherents of Christian identity, it wasn't enough to claim ancient Israelite heritage. They also had to vilify the pretenders. Christian identity is wildly anti-Semitic. Its theology expanded the migrations of the lost 10 tribes all across Europe, because of course the Germans have to be descendants of the ancient Israelites. But Christian identity followers also rewrote the book of Genesis in order to claim that Adam and Eve were white, and Eve gave birth to twins, Abel fathered by Adam and Cain fathered by the serpent, which is just something straight off the Maury show. And Abel's descendants were white, and Cain's descendants were the progenitors of all the other races. They usually claim that modern Jewish people are descended from the serpent seed, and white people of European descent are God's true chosen people and the true inheritors of the covenant. I don't think I need to explain why this theory is preposterous, or just embarrassingly desperate. My point is that from early on, the modern tax protest movement has been closely interwoven with far-out radical religious ideas predicated on anti-Semitism, racism, and a warped notion of Christianity. It's like these people want to ignore everything Jesus actually said, especially the part where he said to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and just focus on the part where they're the chosen people, where they're special. Getting back to the history, A.J. Porth's tax protest movement began in the 1950s, and his fight with the government drew the attention of Christian identity minister Bill Gale. The two movements merged, maybe not completely, but largely, and then Gale started a new movement called the Posse Comitatus. Essentially, the Posse Comitatus was a reaction to the civil rights movement. This is a quote from Levitas's book, and it begins with a quote from a right-wing magazine that was being published in the 1960s. Mushrooming like an atomic explosion, all over the U.S., formerly obedient tax slaves are rising in full revolt against their continued exploitation by the income tax, declared the Mercury. The morality and legality of the tax strike is beyond any question. It is made a moral imperative by pages of time in the white man's long struggle to retain his liberty from the ambition of tyrants of all descriptions. Linking the morality of the tax strike to the white man's struggle, the Mercury made explicit one of the driving forces behind the burgeoning tax strike movement: white resentment over federal laws and programs perceived as benefiting blacks at the expense of whites. By 1968, it was obvious that massive resistance had failed, and that the government was committed to dismantling segregation. Viewed through the eyes of white supremacists and ordinary bigots, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the War on Poverty of the same year, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 proved that the hard-earned tax dollars of whites would now be redistributed to blacks, whether through direct aid, political patronage, or both. The riots that rocked Los Angeles, Detroit, Newark, and other cities further solidified white resentment and fears about compensating blacks, legislatively or otherwise, for the ill effects of segregation and discrimination. The idea at the heart of the Posse Comitatus was that white Americans, who are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites and the true inheritors of their covenant with God, are under attack from minorities, who are the descendants of Satan, and who have infiltrated the US government and filled our heads with lies to prevent us from knowing our actual legal rights. We've been duped, and now we're all paying taxes when we aren't legally required to, and that tax money is going straight to minorities. This idea that we're all following laws that don't apply to us because we aren't smart enough to read and interpret the law for ourselves is also central to this movement and central to Barry's book. While Porth encouraged people to arm themselves in case the government came after them, the Posse Comitatus told their members that the government was coming after them and they'd better hide their women and children and arm themselves to the teeth. They weren't interested in just writing ridiculous legal theories on their tax returns. They wanted to overthrow the government. They even tried to take over a county in California. They formed actual posses. These were people who felt that the John Birch Society just wasn't radical enough. As a reminder, Chad Daybell was an admirer of the John Birch Society. Out of the Posse Comitatus came the sovereign citizen movement. Sovereign citizens are people who believe that they can renounce their citizenship in the United States, freeing them from following the laws, but still live here, identify as American, and enjoy the protections of the Constitution. It's a contradictory belief, born right out of A.J. Porth's misinterpretation of the law, in which Bill Gale and Harry Beach, who popularized the Posse Comitatus, also engaged. Now, I'm lumping a lot of people under the sovereign citizen label, most of whom have never identified as such. This is largely because the reputation that sovcits have developed is so negative that nobody wants to call themselves that anymore, even sovcits. Especially now that the FBI is saying that sovcits are the single largest domestic tea threat in America. These people are incredibly violent. They will shoot police rather than hand over their driver's licenses during traffic stops. They'll get into armed standoffs. Remember when Cliven Bundy led that month-long standoff with the government over cattle grazing rights? The Bundys are sovcits. Remember when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City? His accomplice, Terry Nichols, was a sovcit. Many of my true crime fans will recognize the name Daryl Brooks, who drove a car through a Christmas parade in Wisconsin. Brooks is a sovcit. Nobody wants to be associated with them, not even them. They're now calling themselves all kinds of things, including American state nationals, which is such an oxymoron.
I'm not a sovereign citizen.
Okay.
I am a United States national. I'm an Ohioan, but I live here. I'm traveling through.
It's bizarre because they're all very rah-rah USA. So they want to identify as American, but they don't actually want to have to follow US state laws. If you're thinking, wait, how can Daryl Brooks be a sovcit if the movement was born out of tax protesting, which was born out of white supremacy? That's complicated. It isn't clear to me how many sovcits are aware that they're part of a movement that originated as a backlash against the civil rights movement. If you ask Barry Cox if he's a racist, he will say absolutely not. And that might be true, I don't know. Adding to the surrealness of all this, Black sovcits have formed their own subculture within that subculture. They call themselves Moorish nationals and claim that Morocco discovered and populated North America before indigenous Americans got here, which would have been at least 24,000 years ago and long before Morocco was a country. It doesn't make any more sense than the white supremacist version, and they use almost exactly the same arguments legally. I'm not even sure what percentage of Moorish sovcits are aware that they're partaking of a movement born out of white supremacy, partly because sovcits of all colors exemplify the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's why I can't say for certain that Barry Cox is a racist. Maybe he's just willfully blind. However, the fact remains that the sovereign citizen movement is one of the modern incarnations of white supremacy, along with the militia movement and the Christian patriot movement. And Christian identity is still hanging around. But I want to focus on sovcits because I believe Barry Cox is one. I've never heard him personally identify that way, so this is only a theory, but everything he's done that we know about points in that direction. I also want to focus on sovcits because we have so much video footage of their inane behavior, and I feel like no matter how much of this book I read to you, seeing sovcits in action explains what they're like better than I ever could. Not only do we have thousands of police body cam videos, but sovcits constantly film their own interactions with the police and post the videos online. They take pride in this, and they frequently lie about the outcomes of their court cases. Now, I want to be clear that Barry Cox has no known association with any militia, and he advocates for nonviolent resistance throughout this book. In fact, he compares himself to Dr. King and Gandhi on multiple occasions. He had the nerve to compare himself to George Floyd and Elijah McClain in his court filings, too. It's really quite astonishing. Does his claimed admiration for Dr. King and Gandhi, a man whose name Barry only spells right once, mean he's not part of the white supremacist diaspora? No. He operates in that milieu. He just might not know it. The other reason I want to talk about sovcits is that as I was doing research, I noticed a particular personality type, let's say. And I do think that Barry, based on everything I've been able to learn about him, shares that type of personality. In fact, I think the traits Barry shares with sovcits are the same ones that the movement inherited from A.J. Porth and Bill Gale. Namely, a rejection of critical thinking that results in ridiculously flawed legal reasoning, a belief in conspiracy theories that have no basis in reality, and hatred for anyone who isn't a straight, white, cis Christian male. And Barry seems to have passed that lack of critical thinking on to his daughter. Let's take a moment to talk about this legal wordplay sovcits engage in. And just a heads up, I am about to play some extended clips, many of which contain people swearing. I avoided the truly heinous clips, but make no mistake, they are out there, and they're an order of magnitude worse than anything I'm going to play here. What sovcits do is misapply and misinterpret the law to justify doing what they want, not unlike the way cult leaders manipulate religion to justify doing what they want. Sovcits don't want to get driver's licenses, register their cars, or follow traffic laws, so when they inevitably get pulled over, they claim that they don't need to do any of those things unless they're engaged in commerce. In fact, it seems like a lot of people end up sovcits because their licenses get suspended and they go online to figure out how they can keep driving, and then they fall down the sovcit pipeline. They say that the Constitution and the Supreme Court have guaranteed their right to travel. And this is what I mean about legal misinterpretation. The Constitution does guarantee the right to travel. But what that means is that you have the right to move freely between states. The intention was to prevent the states from creating country-like borders. It's the reason you can drive across a bridge to get from Kentucky to Ohio, and you don't have to stop and show your passport. What that clause in the Constitution does not mean is that you can do whatever you want as long as you're moving from one place to another and going for a reason other than business. But sovcits will insist to the police that they're traveling, not driving, so they don't have to follow traffic laws.
He's also not driving. Driving's a commercial.
I'm not driving. I'm outside of your jurisdiction, actually. Who do you work with?
You need a driver's license as well as your vehicle to be registered.
I'm not even a driver, man. I'm a traveler. What makes me a driver?
You're operating your motor vehicle on a public way in
I'm not operating. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not operating.
You were operating.
No, I'm not. I'm traveling. There's a difference.
I'm not driving.
You're not driving.
I'm not driving. I have freedom of travel, which the Constitution gives.
I'm not driving, I'm traveling because I'm not
driving, I am traveling.
I'm traveling. I'm traveling, not driving.
Okay. We have a right to travel in the state of Florida, which I'm pretty sure you're knowledgeable of.
Okay. Okay. So does he have a driver's license?
He has a right to travel and paperwork that says that.
Okay.
I'm traveling privately. So
I am not driving. I'm traveling. No. I'm not driving. I'm traveling.
Okay. Nope.
I can travel with this permit.
No, you cannot.
And 200 countries, including America. I am not driving, I'm traveling. I have my own private conveyance. No, I am not driving. That's for a driver. That's for commercial. This is not commercial. This is not a commercial vehicle. That's my private conveyance.
So everything's...
That's our evidence right there.
With you that I'm driving? Where is the evidence that I'm a driver? Because there is a definition.
All right. You're driving a vehicle with no tag on it.
It's not driving though. That's kind of a commercial term.
No. You're traveling by means of driving.
No, sir.
Yes. Well, what are the means?
With that.
What means are you traveling then? You're traveling, but by what means?
By using an automobile.
Right. You're operating an automobile, correct?
No.
You're operating, meaning you're in control of.
I didn't ever
you're
say
not.
that.
You're not in control of an automobile. You're not in control of this automobile.
I'm in use of it.
You're in use of it.
Yes.
So you don't control it.
I mean, it's got a computer system.
It's got a computer. My man,
if it decides to take control, it can't.
They'll say that their cars aren't motor vehicles, but personal household goods.
Sir, I need your driver's license and registration or proof of insurance for the vehicle.
Well, this isn't a vehicle.
Do you know what
I'm traveling right now, my private conveyance. You don't want to be driving.
This is my private conveyance, sir.
You're driving.
I am not driving. I'm not. This is a private conveyance. This is not a automobile. It's a private vehicle.
Okay. This car is a private conveyance, a house car, a passenger car. My friends, this is a private house car.
Wherever you want.
He's not operating a motor vehicle. He's
driving.
He is not driving. He is not operating a motor vehicle. He is transferring his property, his private property, from one place to the next.
Okay.
He is not driving.
Okay. Well, he's going to jail for that. So.
Instead of license plates, they'll print up their own little signs that say things like, not for hire, or private. They insist that the government has no jurisdiction over them because the government is a corporation, and they haven't signed a contract with said corporation.
You're a commercial entity. You're not even a freaking part of my land, dude. You're a commercial entity.
I just don't agree to the contracts.
Sure. And instead, you guys are making up your corporate policies as you go.
No, sir, I do not contract.
You're trying to impose government policy, a corporate government policy, onto the civilian population.
Because I don't have to. You guys are a corporation. I do not have to contract with you.
I'm not going to debunk all their arguments because that would take hours. I went down a real rabbit hole with the sovcits and watched about 200 videos on Van Balion's channel, which I'll link below. If you want to watch a Brit break down the law regarding sovcits, in multiple countries no less, while cracking jokes, Van Balion is fantastic. One of the core features of sovereign citizens is the attitude of these people. It's the audacity. I've never seen people speak to the police like this, and I've watched a lot of police interrogations. The attitude that sovcits display is just unreal. I'm going to play some more clips, but I chose the ones with the language least likely to get this channel age restricted.
Okay, you have 15 minutes.
I ain't obligated to give you shit.
So listen, okay, just listen. What is you gonna do? Like, I'm gonna file a lawsuit. I'm never getting driver's license. I'm never getting registration. I'm never getting insurance. I will be at the federal courthouse tomorrow. You a clown. You don't even know what a motor vehicle is. Both of y'all. That's what a motor vehicle is. What y'all doing? Extorting people for money. The fuck is wrong with you, clown? Y'all some clowns.
I do not consent to this stop.
They ain't ready to touch me because they public servants. And they fucking work for me. That's why y'all my bitches. A servant's a bitch, right? That's why y'all my bitches. He my bitch. She my bitch. You see how I talk to him? They wanted to ask me if I'm on medication.
Now she's attacking my door. This is assault. Assault. Assault.
My car is not registered. So what's wrong with you? It's an automobile. It's not a motor vehicle. It's mine. It's private property. And you are trespassing. He's trespassing.
You already were given 15 minutes.
The same rules that everyone else follows.
No.
You need to do the same to be on the roadway. You are not unique, sir.
That's incorrect, sir. So you will be
In order
sued
to
for
get,
this.
sir,
You will be sued for this.
Okay.
And you will be sued too, since you're here conspiring. And you definitely will be sued.
That's fine.
Would you like me to read your rights?
You already trespassed upon them, and I have the right to remain silent, so quit asking me your questions and
Fair
go
enough.
away.
Dude, why do you want to live this way, man? I'm trying to help you, dude. You don't want to live this way. You're being exposed as a criminal, man. You don't care about the law. You care about your paycheck. Dude, why do you want to live this way, man?
Sir, step back.
What is your name?
Step
Shut
back.
up. What's
You're
your
about
name?
to get detained.
Get off my property, you piece of shit. Get over here.
At the right. Why? Let me ask you something. Why are you driving then? You're not driving to work. You're driving to the park.
Life.
Calm down.
I have a life.
All right.
Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I have hobbies. I have people I like
Okay,
to see.
well-
Go back there now.
Back here. You have a child. Can you just stop?
Christ.
You have a child, and you're pulling
Are you
knives
okay,
out.
buddy?
Yeah, ask. That's yes, sir. There's more knives in the car. Not yes, sir. Here's a knife.
They will refuse to identify themselves.
It's a traffic stop if I'm a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
I'm not a U.S. citizen.
Do you
I'm
have
a
some form of an
non-resident.
ID?
Okay, do you have an ID with you?
I'm not required to have one.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
You're required to have a license to operate your motor vehicle in the state of Massachusetts.
I'm sorry, sir, but you're incorrect.
What law says that I have to have a license?
I'm not actually.
Yes, you are.
You're incorrect, sir.
I'm not required to have a
You
license to travel, sir.
Okay, give me your license.
I don't have a license.
You don't have a license.
I'm not required to have a license.
You are.
Sir. I'm not IDing. I'm not required to ID.
Okay, well then you're going to come out of the car.
No, I'm not coming out the car.
Where is your evidence that I am bound to your statutes? Where is that evidence? Do you have it with you? What's the
For
charge?
failing to identify yourself on a
What's the
traffic
charge?
stop.
I just told you. What evidence do you have that I am bound to identify to you?
Do you want to provide your name or no?
Sir, I do not wish to contract.
That's fine. I'll just book you as a John Doe.
They will lecture the police on the law, which they think they know better than anyone.
I'm studying to be a lawyer and...
I study law. Okay.
Well, I've been studying law for about 3 years now.
Please educate yourself, sir. If you'd like to educate yourself, this will inform you. Please take it. Avoid the lawsuit. If you'd like to read this, sir, it will inform you guys. Sir, you gave a copy of this to your department, so you guys should more than know about
You're
this.
required to produce a license.
That's fine. I'm not trying to be a jerk, sir. I just know the law probably a lot better than you do.
I have Thompson versus Smith. I'm explaining to you guys right now because you're supposed to be upholding the law and you're not. You are in violation of the law right now. Thompson versus Smith, Supreme Court, has stated that you have the unimpeded right to travel all 50 states and all territories without a license. It clearly states that.
And so if you guys are going to continue to steal my property, you guys are going to be subject to Title 18 federal lawsuits, Title 14 under color of law, depriving me of my rights. Under the Supreme Court case, Kent versus Dulles, 1958, the right to travel is covered under liberty.
100 federal service order.
Avoid the lawsuit.
Am I arrested?
No, you're detained for the 5th time.
That means I'm arrested.
No, it doesn't.
If I can't,
it means give me your passport. That's what it means.
You don't know the law, sir.
Okay, whatever.
There you go. You don't know the law, sir. I'm telling you.
So in order to get my private automobile back, you guys are coercing me into registering my private automobile, which per California Code, Section 260 says that a private automobile is not required to be registered, and it's classified as upheld by the Supreme Court as household goods and a private automobile.
It is. You must get it registered in order to get it released.
The car had a private plate displayed on it, which
yes,
clearly...
I'm aware it had an illegal plate that you made yourself. Yes, sir.
Well, illegal is subjective, sure.
It's really not subjective.
It is.
And so it's my desire to study it and know it well, so that way that I'm abide by it. I do have a PhD. I'm actually really smart. I read a lot. I'm actually listening to a book on contract law right now. Under commercial code, it's a contract. If it's admirable maritime law, there needs to be an agreed upon contract, and I'm not agreeing to any contract.
Do you have a license?
No, you can call your sergeant if you're unaware of how private and public law works, sir. I already have
Under California Vehicle Code, you are.
Under California Vehicle Code Section 260, it says that only commercial vehicles are required to be registered.
Incorrect.
That is very correct, sir. I'm actually an attorney.
Are you gonna give me your
I'm
ID?
actually an attorney, sir.
Okay, that's fine.
So I'm positive that that's correct.
Okay.
This
so
is
you're
not
refusing to ID yourself.
Sir, so I'm not free to go is what you're saying?
No, you're not free to go.
So I'm being arrested, actually.
You're not being arrested, you're detained at this point.
This
You're
is
not
an
being
arrest,
arrested.
sir.
I haven't told you you're under arrest. I've never said that.
If I'm not free to go, then I'm arrested.
No, there's detention and there's arrest. There's
That's incorrect. Sir, can you please call your sergeant on duty?
I'm preserving the record because I'm preserving my rights.
I don't really
sir.
care. Give me your ID, please. Thanks.
Yeah, hold on. I'm also gonna. I also have a notice for you, gentlemen, as well.
I don't need your notice. I need that.
Well,
I need your identification.
You must be noticed, sir. That's required by common law
I don't care about
and
common law. Just
statute
give me
law.
your
That's the law, sir. You think I don't know the law? That's not lawful, sir.
Yes, it is.
That's not. That may be legal, but it's not lawful. That's the guy who's driving for hire. Commerce means, look up driver in the Black's Law Dictionary. What do you say?
I don't need to do that.
Somebody who is driving for hire.
Yeah.
So the definition of driving versus the definition of traveling, there's a dictionary.
Okay. I've been studying. Look, I've been led. People. Man, I don't even know how to say this. Look, what I'm trying to say is the laws, like the Supreme Court cases and all that stuff, I literally thought I was being lawful.
They'll give the police fee schedules explaining how they charge for their time and how a traffic stop will cost the department thousands or millions of dollars.
I do have a fee schedule. It is $5,000 for every, 15 minutes you'll hold me up, just so you know.
I know you ain't take my weed. I know you ain't take my weed. I called the door, y'all take my weed. That's $1 million I'm gonna bill all you bitches.
So we have put these guys on notice for a $15,000 inconvenience fee.
The stones you have to say something like that to a police officer, especially after all we've heard about police brutality in the last decade. And sovcits are obstreperous. They've got that Sarah Boone-style malignant tenacity. Van Bellion has an entire playlist just of videos that end with sovcits getting their car windows broken so the police can drag them from their vehicles. And it's always because they refuse to show their driver's licenses or something equally stupid. I have serious misgivings about the police as an institution in this country, but I watch these videos and find myself annoyed that the cops aren't being more violent. Sovcits are so irritating and infuriating that I, a hardcore pacifist, find myself thinking, just pepper spray him already. Just break the car window. Just toss the car in the compactor with the guy inside it. Because here's the thing. There's no reasoning with these people. Their certainty is unshakable and isn't based in logic or critical thinking. It's based on these ridiculous, complicated lies about how the law works. So that's the context of Barry's book. Tax protesting arose from a white supremacist reaction to the civil rights movement, adopted violent anti-government tactics, and now manifests most visibly as idiots engaging in interminable arguments with cops over traffic stops. When they aren't firing at the police or driving through parade crowds. I couldn't find out much about Barry Cox's past until Megan Connor, God bless her, did a video profiling him. If you want to watch her complete deep dive on his history, I'll link her video below. Much of what I'll talk about in this section came from her video, so thank you, Megan. Barry Cox was born on June 11th, 1941 in LA County. Megan thinks that he and his father converted to Mormonism around the time Barry was in high school or college. She says he attended San Bernardino College, but Barry would later claim to have gotten both a bachelor's and a master's from BYU. I contacted them, but they couldn't give me any information because of FERPA. This isn't the only educational mystery in Barry's past either, which I'll get to later. Barry served a 2-year mission in England before marrying Janice, who was 5 years his junior. They had 6 kids, 4 daughters and 2 sons, including a daughter who died in infancy. He and Janice raised their children primarily in Southern California, where Barry worked as an insurance salesman in Orange County. He claimed to specialize in estate tax counseling, in spite of the fact that he isn't and has never been a lawyer or an accountant. For a time at least, he made very good money, and he was fond of flashy cars and trips to Vegas. He also loves Knott's Berry Farm. And he was at least the partial owner of a racehorse named Silk Panties. Very classy. Barry appears to be pretty materialistic and focused on appearances, and he and Janice fought rather intensely, at least when Megan used to visit. His eldest child, Stacy, reportedly told her husband that her father had been inappropriate with her, but I don't know if that's true. Barry was also allegedly arrested for solicitation, and Megan says he liked to do photo shoots with his daughters in bathing suits. So, it's not great. Megan also says that when she was approximately 9 and Lori and Summer were about 8 and 10, Barry took them to see Rambo in the theater. I don't know if he was hoping they'd be horrified and climb into his lap, or if he just really wanted to see Rambo and didn't care that the kids were along. It's not a good look either way, though. In the late 80s, Barry decided to quit paying his taxes. I don't know when he got indoctrinated into sovcit ideology, but he refused to pay federal income taxes for 1988, 1989, and 1990. In 1997, Barry tried to sue the IRS. Based on the content of his book and the habits of sovcits, I'm guessing he sued in an attempt to get back all of the federal income tax he'd paid over the years. In 1998, however, he ended up pleading guilty to filing false documents in order to avoid paying his taxes. He attempted to represent himself, just like Lori is doing, and just like sovcits almost always do, and he claims to have studied law at Citrus Belt Law School, which closed during the pandemic and also couldn't tell me if Barry had ever been enrolled there. He doesn't claim to have graduated, and Citrus Belt wasn't accredited anyway, so maybe it isn't surprising that Barry ended up in federal prison in Texas. Barry served a year and a day in prison, and his family lied to everyone about where he was, saying he was visiting his sick mother. While in prison, he attempted to withdraw his guilty plea on the basis that he had no tax liability. A memorandum opinion regarding the case reads, "Plaintiff's operative amended complaint lacks clarity, organization, and a cohesive statement of fact." You're telling me. Barry had put most of his assets in other people's names to hide them from the IRS, and Megan says that while he was in prison, his son Alex, in whose name Barry had put his giant house, had the house refinanced and ran off with $170,000, and there was nothing Barry could do about it. He was ordered to pay over $200,000 in restitution to the IRS, which later swelled to over $300,000, and finally they took the house. I guess putting it in Alex's name didn't work. This is from a judge's opinion and order from June 22nd, 2012. Upon his release from prison, Mr. Cox filed several Federal Tort Claims Act suits in federal district court against the United States, the IRS, the United States Department of Justice, and the United States Probation Office. All 3 suits were dismissed, with the district court noting in one of its dismissal orders that Mr. Cox's true intent was to collaterally attack his criminal conviction. Mr. Cox appealed that dismissal order, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit dismissed the appeal as frivolous. While that appeal was pending, Mr. Cox again attempted to challenge his criminal conviction based on his contention that he had no tax liability for the 1988, 1989, and 1990 tax years. The district court dismissed the suit, finding Mr. Cox's arguments to be frivolous. Frivolous is a word that's coming up a lot in these legal documents. That's not the only time Barry got in trouble with the law. He got in hot water with the Arizona State Bar for advertising his legal practice, and a judge issued a cease and desist. I'm reading from a press release put out by the State Bar of Arizona. A judgment of default and cease and desist order was issued by Pinal County Superior Court judge against Barry L. Cox for engaging in the unauthorized practice of law in Arizona. The order stems from a complaint filed by the State Bar of Arizona after Cox advertised estate planning services. A flyer reading estate planning documents was left on several Santan Valley residents' doorsteps, listing a menu of services and identified Cox as Barry L. Cox, Esquire, legal document writer. In its complaint, the bar asserted that offering estate planning services, identifying himself as a legal document writer, and using the Esquire designation for lawyers led the public to believe he was authorized to practice law in Arizona. The State Bar found that Cox had never been authorized by the Arizona Supreme Court to engage in the practice of law in Arizona, nor certified as a legal document preparer. On November 9, 2018, Barry L. Cox and any corporate or business entity owned, controlled, or operated by him was ordered to immediately and permanently cease and desist from engaging in the unauthorized practice of law in Arizona, and enjoined from using the designations lawyer, attorney at law, counselor at law, law office, JD, Esquire, or equivalent words. He must also pay for costs and expenses associated with the State Bar of Arizona's investigation. This is obviously another sovcit thing. They all think that they're secretly lawyers. According to his former son-in-law's statement to the police, when Barry's daughter Stacy got divorced, Barry went to her husband Steve's place of work, where he quoted scripture and questioned my integrity. Then Barry threw Steve up against a wall and stuffed the divorce decree down his shirt while another employee called 911. Barry was charged with assault and domestic V, but I couldn't figure out what happened with those charges. One of the court filings I dug through mentioned a plethora of civil suits. I didn't find all of them. I wasn't even sure where to look because I don't know every county he's lived in. One I did find, the docket for, shows that Barry and Janice were sued in 2009 by an armored car company. Not like the kind that goes around collecting money. This company sold individuals bulletproof cars or helped them upgrade the cars they had. The case was finally dismissed after 3 years due to lack of prosecution, but if I read the docket correctly, it looks like no one could track Barry and Janice down to serve them. I don't know what the nature of the lawsuit was, if it was for non-payment or if Barry sold the employee's life insurance, but I can't help thinking that this might have had something to do with doomsday prepping. Maybe they thought they needed their own Pope-mobile to drive to the white camps. Alternately, given how many sovcits end up getting their car windows broken by the police, I wonder if Barry had super strong windows put on his car to prevent them from being smashed by the cops. In the midst of researching this, I discovered a saga involving Barry and a simple traffic ticket. In 2022, he was ticketed for driving 35 miles an hour in a 25 zone. Not a big deal, but he refused to sign the ticket, a classic sovcit move, and then refused to pay the ticket, wouldn't show up to court, demanded a jury trial, didn't show up for his bench trial, got convicted, got his license suspended, and then got designated a vexatious litigant after he tried to sue the police officer who ticketed him, the judge, the prosecutor, and the governor of Utah for malicious prosecution for a traffic ticket. The docket contained over 120 entries spanning 2.5 years, nearly all of which were filings from Barry. I read more than 500 pages of filings about a traffic ticket. And I'll tell you, Barry's court filings sound exactly like his book. He even quotes scripture. That brings us to the other side of Barry Cox's personality. He's devoutly religious. He's a convert to Mormonism, and like many converts, he's kind of intense about it. Barry and Janice were temple workers later in life, and Megan described Barry as a spiritual giant, even among his own brothers and sisters. And Steve Cope did say that Barry quoted scripture before assaulting him. How does Barry reconcile these two halves of his personality? Beats me. I mean, he and Janice vacationed in Vegas so often that people began questioning them about it, in response to which they would explain that they had a really good dentist there, and it's hard to find a good dentist. Barry is an ex-con temple worker. That would seem to be a contradiction in terms, but I think the ex-con comes directly out of the temple worker in the sense that Barry believes he's superior to everyone else and can do what he wants because he's smarter and wiser and more spiritual than the rest of us. Megan talks about how Barry divided the world up into the top 5% of people who are smarter and more attractive, and the lower 95, as he called them, who were stupid and ugly. I'm sure you can guess which section Barry thought he was in. Ironically, Barry constantly accuses others of being arrogant. According to another legal filing, when Barry Cox's daughter Stacy was getting divorced, her husband claimed that his soon-to-be ex-wife had told him that Barry had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not qualified to even guess at what mental health diagnosis he might have, or might not have. There's certainly some paranoia evident here, though. There's also a great deal of disorganization, a general lack of critical thinking, and an avoidance of reality. But I see those in lots of people's writing. The most glaring personality issue that comes across in all of this is just how obsessive Barry is. I estimate he was filing a motion almost every week in his traffic ticket case, and that went on for 2.5 years. And he does something I see in sovcits all the time. Once he gets what he says he's been wanting, he moves the goalpost. So he kept demanding discovery in the traffic ticket case, and I couldn't figure out what discovery there would be other than the traffic ticket itself and the body cam footage, which he had. Turns out he wanted the officer's radar gun certification and the records for the calibration of the radar gun. He finally got those, but then he started arguing that radar guns aren't accurate enough to justify ticketing him. Whenever he gets what he wants, he comes up with a new issue. When you get designated a vexatious litigant, that means you aren't supposed to be able to file anything in the court without representation. Basically, they want you to hire a lawyer to make sure that you're justified in filing things and using the court's time. There are a bunch of other requirements too. But that didn't stop Barry. He kept right on mailing motions to the court. That level of obsession seems potentially pathological to me. But maybe it's just a really weird hobby. Obviously, the possibility that Barry is dealing with mental illness is one that we need to take into account when we think about this book. But I'm reluctant to say that this text is a product of mental illness. I read another book called Sovereign Citizens, A Psychological and Criminological Analysis that pointed out that for a while, a lot of judges were sending sovcits for competency evaluations because the way they talk sounds crazy. But the vast majority of them came back without diagnosed mental illnesses. Despite their evidently bizarre behavior and outrageous claims, and the sovereign citizens' willingness to engage in tactics that have no chance of succeeding, the majority do not have a diagnosable mental illness. There is no identifiable mental condition or disorder that explains the behavior or beliefs of sovereign citizens. Perhaps the two closest are schizotypal, a condition which encompasses personality traits such as suspiciousness and magical thinking, and that is correlated with belief in conspiracy theories, and delusional disorder, the latter of which is classified as a psychotic disorder. Mental health professionals who perform court-ordered competency evaluations likewise often find that the beliefs of sovereign citizens do not meet the diagnostic criteria for any specific psychiatric condition. The book discusses one case in which a sovcit was deemed incompetent to stand trial, but was successfully treated for his illness. Afterward, he was apparently easier to deal with in court, but he still believed all of the sovereign citizen nonsense. My suspicion is that if an angel appeared tomorrow and healed the world of all mental illness, Barry Cox would still believe he doesn't have to pay taxes. While I'm not going to mock Barry for potentially having a mental illness, I'm also not going to excuse his behavior and views because he might be ill. How the American public can dismantle the IRS. Debunking myths about the IRS and federal income tax. Prologue. The author has written and published this non-fiction book, How the American Public Can Dismantle the IRS, to reveal to the American public overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of IRS fraud and what the people of the United States can peacefully do about it. As openings go, I think this is a good one. It's very straightforward about the purpose and contents of the book. I don't see any reason to beat around the bush in a book like this. I can't help noticing, however, that Barry appears to be rage-capping words the same way Sarah Boone does. I've decided to start a list of red flags in books based on things I've seen while making videos for this channel. So far I have rage capping, scare quotes, loyalty tests, and obedience. Warning: the information in this book is highly controversial. It contains material that is factual and somewhat political. The author has presented his assessment and professional opinion that shows the IRS, DOJ, and federal judiciary and other federal government entities of the United States government in Washington, D.C. are unimaginably corrupt. This book reveals how and why the charlatans and hypocrites who administer and enforce the laws, the Title 26 USC and Title 26 CFR, and parallel table of authorities and rules, violate the law and could care less about the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Before we get into the meat of this book's contents, I want to point out that Barry's writing isn't terrible, although it does get worse as the book goes on. But here at the beginning, his sentences are pretty well constructed, his paragraphs flow nicely, and although he doesn't always use words correctly, his vocabulary is large and well employed. I want to give credit where credit is due, partly because I'm going to demolish the fundamental message of this book. But before that, I want to point out that this is a good opening hook. He uses the idea that the information in this book is controversial to create tension and draw the reader in, and that's a tried and true method to increase reader engagement. All that said, this whole book reads like a rant. One incredibly long, repetitive rant. It's obvious he never proofread it. There's one place where he spelled warning with 3 N's. And only one chapter has a discernible subject. I suspect that Barry would get himself worked up, he'd sit down, vomit all his thoughts onto the page, and then do the same the next time he felt like writing. The reader will see the truth about inside government corruption of the United States and proof that is conscience-shocking. If the reader is a person or individual that believes they are taxpayers obligated to pay a federal income tax to the IRS upon demand, and who thinks or believes the officers, employees, and elected officials encrusted in the deep state or swamp of parasitic bureaucrats have the right to impose and collect a federal income tax upon the salary or wage of the American citizens, then stop. If the reader is easily offended by light and truth, or believes the federal government works for the best interest of the American people and are honest men and women who wouldn't knowingly and willingly conspire to harm or destroy innocent citizens of the American public in order to get personal power and control or to make financial advantage over the American public by imposing an illegal and unconstitutional tax schism without the consent of the governed people of the United States of America, to promulgate the biggest lie ever perpetrated upon the citizens of this most favored nation on earth, then stop now and discard this book. This section continues to build anticipation and prime the reader. But I want to point out what Barry is saying, if you ignore his use of this rhetorical device and his unbelievably long sentence. He's saying that unless you're already the kind of person who's inclined to believe in conspiracy theories, you should stop reading. Now, he's doing it in such a way that he makes the reader want to be part of the readership, but he's still trying to scare off readers who might not be prone to belief in this sort of thing. He's revealing that his goal isn't to educate or convince. He wants to preach to the choir. I also want to point out this phrase, the most favored nation on earth. This is an example of American exceptionalism, or rather, belief in American exceptionalism, which is the idea that America is a unique and exceptional nation unlike any other. It's frequently extended to the belief that God himself favors America over other nations, and sometimes even that God helped found America. American exceptionalism is tied to manifest destiny and the belief that white Europeans were given the Americas by God to colonize. American exceptionalism is also deeply ingrained in Mormonism. The entire idea of the Book of Mormon is that the Americas are the promised land. God chose to restore the gospel here. You probably won't be surprised to learn that I kinda hate American exceptionalism. Every country is special. Every country has tried to do things differently and better, tried to improve upon past institutions. Every country has strengths and weaknesses and something to contribute to the global community. But you can see why this belief would appeal to Barry. He's special, his country is special, and his religion is special. It's all top 5%. Sovcits often believe that they're exceptionally smart and capable of understanding the law on a level most people cannot. That we're basically all paying our taxes and stopping at red lights because we're too stupid to realize we don't have to.
Well, other people have to register a vehicle. Why makes you different than anybody else? Why? Why are you special and everybody else has to obey rules? Can you tell me that?
It's not about the rules.
What is it about then?
It's about the rules being wrong.
The reader of this book will discover the truth that there is no evidence in published statutes of Title 26 USC or regulations of Title 26 CFR that explains who or what the IRS really is. This book will convincingly show proof to establish the true origin and purpose of the Internal Revenue Service. Conspicuously, the reader will be astonished to learn the nation's most feared agency of the United States government is not a valid entity or agency of the Department of the Treasury of the United States of America. This is the cornerstone of Barry's argument. Now, I'm not going to spend this video explaining all of the ways Barry is wrong, because that would quickly get boring, but I will take a moment to clarify that this argument is baseless. The IRS and its right to collect federal income tax was established by the 16th Amendment. It was ratified by the states. That happened. But Barry is going to insist that it didn't. And he's going to fix his attention on Title 26 USC and Title 26 CFR. Now, I didn't read all of these documents because I find tax codes about as interesting as the next guy, but I did do some reading. And Barry is technically correct. These two documents don't appear to contain an explanation of the legality of federal income tax. Because the 16th Amendment already did that. It's in the Constitution now. There's no reason to repeat that information in the tax code. It would just be redundant. That's the kind of reasoning Barry used to write this book. That's sovcit reasoning. The entire book is based on the premise that because Title 26 USC and Title 26 CFR don't repeat the text of the 16th Amendment, they're legally invalid. Barry has basically made up a legal requirement, and because it isn't fulfilled, he's claiming the IRS is illegal. I see this all the time with sovcits. One of their favorite tactics is to demand to speak to a supervisor. They are the ultimate Karens. And they'll claim that they have the legal right to get a supervisor called down to a traffic stop. They'll claim it's illegal for the police to turn the lights on their cars unless they're driving to an emergency. They just make up laws. How do the officials of the IRS, DOJ, Judiciary, and Congress react to such allegations alleged in this book? They cowardly refuse to comment or answer questions regarding the origin or authority or validity of this blessed and privileged nation's tax collector. The position of the IRS cabal is to cowardly renounce all responsibility to answer questions from the American public about the statutory and regulatory authority of the Internal Revenue Service. The reader of this book will see and understand why the IRS claims that it is exempt and immune from prosecutorial lawsuits. It will show that the IRS is a foreign criminal organization that is not authorized by the U.S. Congress to do anything. It will prove that the federal income tax is not direct or indirect or apportioned as the Constitution of the United States requires. The IRS doesn't refuse to answer questions. The IRS constantly answers questions. The IRS has websites devoted to addressing exactly the issues Barry is raising. I found them on my first search. I'm guessing that the reason Barry feels this way is that he isn't satisfied with the answers he's received. And he's dissatisfied because all those answers mean he has to pay taxes. And he shouldn't have to pay taxes. He's special. Taxes are for the lower 95. As I've said in previous videos, all conspiracy theories come back to anti-Semitism. I can't figure out why, but they all do. And Barry's use of the term cabal here makes that obvious. The word cabal has become an anti-Semitic dog whistle. When Barry says the IRS is a foreign criminal organization, 99% chance he's referring to Jewish bankers. We get that hint of American exceptionalism again here too. This blessed and privileged nation. The reader will discover the origin of the IRS criminal regime. To be clear, the IRS arrogantly and boastfully ignores the United States Code, USC, the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, the United States Constitution, its amendments, Bill of Rights, and many related statutes and regulations and policies of proper government, including the rights provided in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. American history illustrates the IRS is part of a cunning scheme and unholy alliance derived from the unconstitutional Economic Stabilization Program of 1913, promulgated by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson in 1913. Like I said, he didn't proofread this. I don't know why Barry ignores the fact that the Constitution has been amended to establish the existence of the IRS. I suspect he's just reasoning backwards. He doesn't want to pay taxes, so he's come up with a justification to not do so. And it doesn't matter to him that he has to ignore reality. Is he out of touch with reality? Maybe. But it does feel awfully convenient that he's out of touch in just such a way as to skip paying taxes. That's part of why I don't think this book was born out of mental illness. It might have been exacerbated by mental illness, but I don't think it started there. One thing that does suggest distorted thinking, though, is the way he describes the IRS. The IRS arrogantly and boastfully ignores the United States Code. Can a government agency be arrogant or boastful? If Barry only wrote like this a couple of times, I would assume poetic license. But Barry is going to spend the entire book ascribing motives and personal qualities to this bureau as a whole. He's also going to bring religion into things, such as this claim that the IRS is part of an unholy alliance, which, again, feels like it's verging into anti-Semitism to me. American law is unique. It is predicated upon the inspired words of God the Father, the creator of all things, who personally appeared to Moses to give the 10 Commandments as written and published in the Bible's first 5 books of the Old Testament, as recorded and written by the ancient prophet Moses in face-to-face revelations with God in the Egyptian desert on Mount Sinai. These laws were intended to peacefully govern the liberated tribes of Israel from 400 years of bondage under the despotism of the pharaohs of Egypt. See Bible's Old Testament books of Exodus, chapter 20. None of this is true. Moses didn't write the Pentateuch. He didn't write any of it. Clearly, Barry's version of American exceptionalism is seeped in his religion.
And so I'm someone who believes in human rights. I believe in human freedom. I'm a child of God just like you.
After going on about this for a while, Barry pivots to a different conspiracy theory. The obvious lies of President Barack Obama are evidence that he was the most corrupt of all the presidents of the United States and was anti-Christian. He thus proclaimed his belief that America is no longer a Christian nation. Mr. Obama told the American public when he was running for the presidency that he was a Christian, and believed that marriage was a sacred union between a man and a woman. That lie dramatically changed when he admitted his Muslim education and his background with the LGBTQ society. Even ignoring the typo in LGBTQ, I don't know what this means. What is the LGBTQ society? We have a society? Where's my invitation? I couldn't figure out what he meant by Obama's Muslim education either, and I looked at Obama's entire educational history. Other than a Catholic middle school, his education seems to have been entirely secular. And I don't know if Barry deliberately misspelled Obama's first name or not, but it won't be the last time. America is not now, nor has it ever been, an exclusively Christian nation. The Founding Fathers saw to that. They understood the importance of the separation of church and state. And the majority of Americans don't consider themselves Christian. That's statistics. Barry turns back to the idea of American exceptionalism and how this has always been a Christian nation. I'm guessing he's read Tim Ballard's books. And then discusses the origins of the tax honesty movement and the suffering of its many martyrs. I think it's safe to assume he counts himself among them. Thus ends the prologue. If you're concerned that it's taken me 10 minutes to get through the prologue, have no fear. This book is incredibly repetitive, with each subsequent chapter introducing less new information than the last, so the pace of this video is going to snowball as we go along. In fact, I'm going to skip some chapters entirely. Chapter 1, Cracking the Code. The repetition begins immediately. Barry starts the chapter by explaining what the reader will learn from the book, which is exactly what he told us in the prologue. After rehashing his earlier promises, we get to our first new piece of information. Make sure you, as the reader of this book, learn right now at the beginning of this book the truth that unless you work for the federal government as an officer, employee, or elected official, or unless you have applied for and received a special license or privileged occupation authorized and issued by the federal government, you are not a taxpayer. Ordinary American citizens are non-taxpayers. This fact is clearly demonstrated in this book. This is another of Barry's core arguments, that somehow only government employees are required to pay federal income taxes. Whether or not he knows this information is incorrect is something we'll get into a bit farther down the road. The biggest and most powerful weapon of the IRS is imposing fear upon the American public, which is unadulterated propaganda. I don't know what this sentence means, but I noticed the mention of fear because Barry comes back to it over and over. He talks about Americans like we're all living in terror under the despotic rule of the IRS. And obviously no one enjoys paying taxes or looks forward to hearing from the IRS, but that isn't the same as living in terror. I don't look forward to getting my car's oil changed either, but I'm certainly not living in fear of Jiffy Lube. This might be projection. It would make sense for Barry to be living in fear of the IRS if they sent him to prison. Or maybe he's trying to do that thing cult leaders do where they make their followers afraid. You're in danger. There's an enemy among us. Do what I say and give me all your money or they'll get you.
This is what the police will do to you if you don't comply and surrender to their every whim.
He mentioned fear pretty frequently in his court filings, too. It seems like fear is a real motivator for Barry, and he assumes that means it must be a major motivation for the rest of us. Barry complains that the tax code is hard to understand, but he's also going to act like he's the only one who can read it properly. And then he's going to misread it. He's quite obviously a fan of President Trump, and this reminded me of that time Trump promised he'd simplify the tax code until we could all file using a postcard. I don't know what came of that. Anyway, Barry then drops this confusing little nugget. The reader will learn in this book, much to the embarrassment to the IRS cabal, that the predecessor of the IRS is the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which is not the legislative product of American legislation, but was predicated upon a foreign-based German source, or wormwood, fictional infiltrator. the origin of the IRS is a sham and unconstitutional. I did look up the definition of wormwood, just in case it had another meaning with which I wasn't familiar, but I couldn't find any definition that fit with this use. But ignoring that, the evil IRS cabal is German? Or at least inspired by Germany? Hilariously, the sentence that follows that one reads, "Most people of the United States are ignorant or confused about these undisputed facts." Yeah, count me in. I am very confused. But Barry promises to explain later and just moves on. The truth is that no IRS, DOJ, or federal judge, or congressman, or senator of the US Congress has had the guts to confront or challenge the facts in this book. The reason for this bizarre and cowardly behavior from government officials is because this information is true. When the government is forced to confront this information, the IRS employees are paralyzed and are shamed to admit it, and they capitulate when challenged. I repeat, the modus operandi, normal position, of the IRS when challenged is they remain silent, or they will obfuscate, surrender, or ignore, or cease to resist any American citizen who will confront them and who will demand correct answers to specific legal questions. 2 points here. He says that no one has the guts to confront the truth because it's true. That is entirely redundant. Second, he's contradicting himself regarding the actions of the IRS. He's repeatedly brought up how we're all living in terror of the IRS, and it's publishing all this propaganda, by which he means brochures like why the American people have to pay taxes. But he's also claiming that the IRS will capitulate the instant someone pushes back against it. So all I have to do to get out of paying taxes is to ask the IRS questions? Then why am I living in terror of the IRS? What I find most perplexing about this idea is that it hasn't worked for Barry. He lost his house because he wouldn't pay his taxes. He went to prison because he didn't want to pay taxes, so he lied on his tax forms. Did he just forget to demand answers to specific legal questions? Well, no, he didn't. He's asked them so many times in these legal documents he's filed. He just doesn't like the answers he's getting, I guess, because, believe me, they've been answered. Those brochures that he keeps referring to as propaganda are specifically written to answer questions like this. The answers are all over the place. But Barry's not happy. Then he bounces back to the Germany thing. The origin of the IRS is similar to the origin of the Yahtzee war machine of World War II, which evolved from the post-World War I street thugs created by the Panzer Corps, the Luftwaffe, and the infamous German SS, Secret Service. The acquiescence of so-called officials of the federal government of the United States of America was a strange and cunning event, an adoption of the German war machine, which we now understand is the IRS, which is another totalitarian scheme of despotism. Yes, the facts prove the IRS acts like the German SS regime that successfully promoted the weapon of fear among the people. It works upon the ignorance of the public with administrative despotism. The IRS regime is an SS copycat regime. The SS worked in Germany during World War I and again in World War II during the Oui Moustache regime with brutal enforcement of win at any cost. But evil did not start in 1914 at the time of World War I. It goes back further to other evil regimes in history who also imposed the satanic device of fear and has been used by dynasties dating back to the dark ages of Rome and Egypt. Did Egypt have a dark age? After reading this about 6 times, I still have no idea how Germany was or is involved, and I have to admit, this is the point at which I lost confidence in Barry's ability to think clearly. I don't know how the IRS can be a copycat of the SS if the IRS came first. How can the IRS be an adoption of the German war machine? Especially since, again, the IRS came first. Oh, and by the way, SS didn't stand for Secret Service. It stood for a German word I can't pronounce, a word which did not mean Secret Service. Disorganization is one of the hallmarks of schizophrenia. Are we seeing it here? Possibly. After reading this book twice, I still can't figure out exactly how Barry thinks the IRS is connected to Germany or the SS, and he's going to contradict that later. It's like the origins of the IRS are a moving target in his mind. This section doesn't so much segue as pivot randomly to Barry's memories of seeing Charlton Heston in the 10 Commandments when he was a teenager, then gets political again. The current and highly contested disputations or schisms between the conservative and liberal political factions in the USA in 2019-2020 are an example of how evil versus good. The root of political arguments has always been the fight over which form of government is best for America, freedom or bondage. In 2019-2020, these schisms are extreme and radical. Well, personally, I think freedom is the way to go. Clearly, Barry demonstrates black and white thinking, just like Chad and Lori and Jody and Sarah Boone. I'm actually going to add that to my list of red flags. I think it's a safe bet that Barry taught Lori to see the world in the same way. Barry goes back to talking about how the IRS is literally evil and the work of Satan. He keeps coming back to propaganda, which refers to the brochures and IRS publications, which I assume includes websites. This seems somewhat ironic. He complained earlier about how difficult the tax code is to understand, but he's also complaining about the documents written to explain the tax code. He spends the rest of the chapter explaining how the IRS knows it's evil, and how it's so embarrassed by its lack of legitimacy that IRS agents will just fall silent and then hide when confronted. It's interesting that he identifies shame and embarrassment as the ways to get an organization to change. I wonder if shaming people is a tactic he uses in personal relationships. It's certainly a tactic Lori has used in her most recent trial. I think we all remember how she tried to shame Nancy Joe.
Do you go on dates with married men? Not naturally?
I still don't understand why Barry believes any of this, though. When he confronted the IRS, it sent him to prison. The shaming failed. But he doesn't admit that, which is very deceptive. Thus ends Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Ugly Truth About the IRS. In this chapter, Barry lays out for us exactly how we, the American people, can dismantle the IRS. And it's a letter-writing campaign. To be sure, the reader must understand that when a critical mass of people, 10 to 12%, of the American public act in concert to present a written ultimatum to the IRS cabal, demanding answers to pertinent questions which they can't honestly answer in good faith, it will impact these misguided and arrogant personnel like an earthquake that shakes the ground and cracks the dam. After the letters are received by the top officials of the IRS cabal, it will only be a short matter of time before the irresistible pressure of letters demanding answers to questions of the American people before the IRS begins to dismantle the criminal organization styled the IRS. Yeah, we just need 10% of Americans to write to the IRS, and it will collapse, freeing us all from the tyranny of federal income taxes so that we no longer have to live in fear. Credit where credit's due, at least Barry is explicit about what we have to do. There's no chance that it will work, but his book promised a plan, and he has provided one. He even gives you the exact questions you need to ask to cause the IRS to collapse. In fact, later in the book, he's going to provide a 10-page letter with at least a 5-page addendum that you can print out and mail to the IRS, and you'll never have to pay taxes again. He shares 2 of the questions now. Where can the American public find, in the published laws of the official statutes, Title 26 USC, or enforcement regulations, Title 26 CFR, that make the average American resident a taxpayer and liable for an income tax predicated upon domestic wage or salary earned from labor? employment. Where is it written in IRC section 6011B, identification of taxpayer, that ordinary people of the American public who are not an officer, employee, or elected official of the federal government of the United States of America made liable for the federal income tax imposed by IRS employees? Those are questions, and I don't doubt Barry when he claims he's asked them of the IRS. In fact, I have a legal filing that he submitted when he sued the IRS for the second time, maybe the third, that asked these exact questions, along with many, many others. It's a 102-page filing. The thing is, he's going to accidentally answer the questions later in the book. He's going to show us the exact texts that answer these questions. And then he's going to misread the answers and claim that there are no answers. And that leads me to the central question I have about this book. Is Barry lying? Or is he just unable to read the code properly? He tries to introduce a new idea, which is that the IRS somehow represents collusion between the three branches of government. He describes this as an incestuous coupling, which is a lot. It makes me wonder, if the executive branch of our government got knocked up by the judicial branch of Canada's government, could their baby tax people? Or is Canada still too close, genetically speaking? There's a lot of offhand religious nonsense in here, especially related to Satan. Barry's belief seems to be that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were inspired by Jesus, but the IRS and the tax codes were inspired by Satan. He writes things like, "To be clear, the foundation of the IRS cabal is trickery and deception. It is satanic." There's a hint of Jody Hildebrandt in all of this. Everything's either good or evil, and all of the words in one category can be used as synonyms for all the other words in that category. So we get statements like this: "The evil-minded and radical behavior of the IRS cabal could care less about the IRM or the law of the land. This flagrant bad behavior is a sign that the IRS cabal promulgates despotism and totalitarianism like the dictators and tyrants of the old world." I don't know what old world he's talking about. There are still dictators and tyrants in this world. Thus ends Chapter 2. Chapter 3. How the American public can dismantle the IRS. If there's one word I could use to describe this book, it would be repetitive. There's more about how the IRS is evil, how it's the result of incestuous coupling, how Americans just pay their taxes because it's easier and because they don't know that if they just ask the right questions, the IRS would collapse. He compares the IRS to the mafia and to the hole-in-the-wall gang that Butch Cassidy was part of. I've never heard of an IRS agent breaking someone's legs and burning their store down because they wouldn't pay up, but I'm just another tax-paying sheeple. Then there's a section titled Judicial Notice, followed by several hundred words written in all caps, which all say exactly the same things he's been saying up to this point, until we get to the Word of God, who created the earth and inspired the founding fathers, gave his personal revelation to the servant, a latter-day prophet, on August 6th, 1883, as follows. And then he quotes Doctrine and Covenants, sections 98 and 101. I can't see what these quotations have to do with the rest of the book, but this is part of a pattern of framing the entire issue in religious terms. He does it in his court filings too. He quotes D&C in them. He quotes the King James Bible, but it's always a stretch. After the D&C quotes, we get a long and, I suspect, cleaned up quote from President Trump. And finally, this book demonstrates how the secret acts of the IRS cabal function to rob the American public of money, property, and rights. The author encourages the reader to learn how the IRS propaganda works to steal from the American public. See IRS publications and IRS brochures. Barry really has a bee in his bonnet about the fact that the IRS publishes a lot of documents. Also, we are too far into this book for him to be continuing to tell us what the book is going to teach us. Just teach it already. Thus ends Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Truth Will Make You Free. The expression is, "the truth will set you free." I'm going to trust that this was an honest mistake and not a dog whistle reference to "work makes you free," a motto that was written above the gates at Auschwitz. This chapter is almost entirely religious talk. Barry quotes the book of Daniel and then talks about Paul the Apostle, which is the first time we see Barry use the specific phrase, "the Jewish cabal," just in case we hadn't figured out what cabal he meant. Like I said, the word cabal only means one thing these days. Then he quotes Galatians and tells the readers that we're living under the yoke of bondage. Thus ends chapter 4. Chapter 6. Examining the applicable law. Yeah, I skipped chapter 5. I'm going to skip a lot of chapters because they just say the same thing over and over. After an unexpected quote from a Tina Turner song, Barry informs us that the IRS is being propped up by federal judges. Judges are part of the evil cabal. No federal judge wants to be the one who collapses the entire house of cards, admitting the truth that IRS officials and personnel have no legislative authority, delegation authority, to impose or collect a federal income tax upon the American public. The judge who are part of the IRS secret combinations, cabal, of evil will endeavor to use the office of the court to block any attempt to expose the truth in their court. I can't help imagining how Barry imagined people would react to this book. Like, by this point, he probably thought we'd all be saying, "Dear God, they got the judges too?" Barry explains how the courts give aid and comfort to the IRS. The many lawsuits that are filed against the IRS in federal court are arbitrarily or summarily dismissed or blocked under the arbitrary decision of the judge of court under FRCP Rule 12b-6, failure to state a claim whereupon relief can be granted. Every time a lawsuit is filed against the IRS cabal, the court judge automatically rejects the complaint from the very beginning of the litigation. The judges will not allow the anti-IRS cabal plaintiff to even appear in federal court for an evidentiary hearing or due process hearing to determine if there is evidence to support the lawsuit. It is prejudicial in favor of the IRS cabal. In most cases, the lawsuit claiming IES fraud is arbitrarily sealed and returned to the plaintiff without any reason or argument. The lawsuit is not allowed to even see the light of day. Can you say, "due process denied"? I think it's a safe bet that this paragraph describes Barry's own experience when he tried to sue the IRS. But he never talks about his own experience. And that's really deceptive, because he knows that none of this will work, right? Does he think it will work if enough people do it in unison? Or is he just lying? Part of why I think he might be lying is that there's a financial incentive. Sovcits usually learn how to be sovcits from people known as gurus, and these gurus teach them the sovcit arguments and often sell them packets of nonsense paperwork and tell them to file it with the courts. They sell fake license plates and fake ID cards. I heard one sovcit tell the police he paid $200 for an international driver's license that allows him to drive in every country on Earth except Nicaragua. I have no idea why Nicaragua was exempted. Anyway, it's a scam. Sovcit gurus market themselves as legal advisors, basically pretending to be lawyers. You can even hire them to come into court with you and give you advice during your court case. I've seen people get pulled over and then call their gurus on the phone to get advice from them about how to handle the traffic stop. In fact, I watched one hilarious video in which a man placed a three-way call to two different gurus during a traffic stop, and they got into an argument about what he should do.
Okay. If you want to save us time, okay, and be on your way faster, you can sign this consent to search form, okay? This says we can take a look inside the vehicle.
Okay, I'm going to do it under duress.
That's fine. Do it under duress if that's how you feel.
Don't sign.
What did you say?
I wouldn't sign.
I would with VC. Put VC on it. But
VC.
It's on contracts.
Okay, never mind. Don't sign it.
I'm curious if this book was intended to be Barry's first foray into being a guru, if that's what he wants to be. I also read a master's thesis, which is a bit out of date. It's from 2014, but it began with an account of how a sovcit guru ran an estate planning business, just like Barry claimed to be doing at one point, that taught people how to cheat on their taxes. Now, I'm not accusing Barry of that because I have no evidence he did such a thing, but I am suggesting that he might be using this book to try to position himself as some type of tax protesting authority. Also, every time he writes something like, "Can you say due process denied?" I hear Lori. In my mind, it's always followed by that scoffing chuckle she does. The people of America must ask, how does the American public solve the injustice of the IRS cabal? The reader will see how at the end of this book. Just keep reading and learning to become a warrior for truth and justice like the Founding Fathers. I guess Barry forgot, here in Chapter 6, that he already told us how to get rid of the IRS back in Chapter 2. It must have slipped his mind. Like I said, there's a sense that he never even reread this book before publishing it, and he's incredibly disorganized. And even though he said he'd tell us later in the book how to accomplish the eradication of the IRS, 2 paragraphs later, he goes ahead and tells us again. It will require 35 to 40 million people of the American workforce who have been the victim of IRS abuse to implement the strategy. It involves signing a non-violent letter sent to the IRS by certified mail, asking good faith questions under the Freedom of Information Act. What is a non-violent letter? As opposed, to a violent letter, like you might get in a Harry Potter book. Barry insists that if we do this, the IRS will fold, and in shame, they will default because they cannot lawfully justify the existence of the IRS cabal. We're back to shame. But then he writes this a few paragraphs later, after restating the questions we're supposed to ask in the letter. The IRS cabal is narcissistic the max. Simply put, the IRS has an excessive or erotic interest in itself as an agency. I asked Gosha what the bleep he thought that was supposed to mean, and he told me it meant Barry has been misunderstanding Plato. But I think that's giving Barry way too much credit, especially given that he followed this paragraph up with, "Can you say obfuscation? Can you say self-policing? Can you say unacceptable behavior from the government? Can you say incompetence? Can you say hostile and unprofessional? Can you say unconstitutional?" Thus ends Chapter 6. Chapter 9. 16th Amendment and more IRS lies. We finally get to the root of the matter. Barry claims that the 16th Amendment was never properly ratified. Then he says, "This big lie has been exposed in several federal court cases." But didn't he just say 2 chapters ago that the courts won't even hear these cases because it would be too embarrassing for the IRS? Which is it? And if the big lie has been exposed, why are we still paying taxes? In truth, verified fact show the federal government's Internal Revenue Income Tax scam lacks statutory and constitutional authority. Moreover, the IRS is not authorized by the 16th Amendment because the attempt to ratify the 16th Amendment to the Constitution failed. The facts prove it was never ratified by the required 36 states of the Union as manifest in the official government records, archives. He doesn't provide any facts regarding the ratification of the 16th Amendment. I'm not sure he understands what a fact is. I'm not saying that sarcastically. I think Barry operates on the idea that what he feels is the truth. He trusts his gut more than his brain. He feels that he shouldn't have to pay taxes, so he comes up with a justification to not pay taxes. And we see this in Lori all the time. She isn't interested in the truth or reality. She doesn't care that none of her motions are arguing anything with a legal basis. All she cares about is how she feels. She feels like the judge is biased, so he must be biased. That's what guides her. She feels like everything was Tylee's fault, so she invents facts to back that up. I suspect that if she had been allowed to say what she wanted at this last trial, she would have claimed that Tylee shot Charles. She implied it throughout. It was ridiculous, but that's how she felt, so she believed it. Tylee is the problem, so anything problematic that happened must have been done by Tylee. This sounds insane, but I think it's more common than most of us realize. Some people really do operate this way. It makes me super grateful to have been raised by people who value critical thinking, especially my mother, who oversaw my 3 years of homeschooling in high school and forced me to write graduate-level research papers. Thanks, Mom. Thus ends Chapter 9. Chapter 10. What is the origin or myth of the IRS? Why should it be dismantled? By the way, a myth and an origin are not the same thing. Maybe he meant origin myth? I don't really know. Here's the quote. The stunning truth about the origin of the IRS is that it is a bastard child of an independent foreign, German, secret quasi-international entity or bogus corporation operating under the White House Chief of Staff liaison. Chapter 10 is the point at which things go off the rails. How can something be quasi-international? Why would the White House Chief of Staff be running the IRS? Doesn't he have enough to do? I can't even begin to guess what this means, but the idea that parts of the government have been replaced with corporations is straight out of the sovereign citizen movement. A lot of sovcits believe that the government went bankrupt, usually around the time the gold standard was abandoned, but estimates vary, and was replaced with a foreign corporation. They also believe that American citizens are being used as a sort of stock in this international corporation, and that if you know the correct words and sentences to use, you can get money from your stock account in the corporation. It's out there. The incontrovertible truth is the IRS was cunningly conceived and created in Puerto Rico in conjunction with the Bureau of Internal Revenue to facilitate the collection of miscellaneous and excise direct taxes under the jurisdiction of TIGTA. TIGTA stands for the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, which provides independent oversight of the IRS. You know, that independent oversight Barry keeps claiming the IRS doesn't have because it's self-policing. How Puerto Rico fits into this German corporation, I don't know. I'm in over my head now. The most important weapon the IRS uses to captivate victims, which they call taxpayers, is to print publications that will scare the hell out of the American public, just like the Germans did in World War II with the Secret Service. Again, SS didn't stand for Secret Service, and I don't think the SS issued brochures aimed at explaining the tax code to citizens. Why is Barry so offended by the IRS printing brochures? I don't know, but he's mad about it and says the IRS only puts those out to frighten people against reading the works of real tax experts, and then lists several dozen people. The only name I recognized from anywhere other than this book was Ron Paul. Then Barry babbles for a few pages, brings up Hillary Clinton's name a few times, again claims that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, he didn't, and then includes a long quote from Mark Meckler, who helped found the Tea Party movement. This is interesting because Barry turned on the Tea Party movement at some point. I guess in 2019 he was still a fan, but by the time he was filing court documents in 2020, he had decided the Tea Party wasn't that cool after all. The quote from Meckler is especially confusing because he believes the 16th Amendment was ratified, and Barry doesn't. So I don't know how Meckler quote is supporting Barry's position. Even Barry writes, but inasmuch as the 16th Amendment was never ratified, his point is mute or irrelevant. His point is moot, not mute. Thus ends Chapter 10. Chapter 11, Nonviolent and Non-Cooperation. In Chapter 11, Barry claims that his method for dismantling the IRS works on the same principles as Gandhi and Martin Luther King's methods. While I appreciate that Barry is advocating nonviolence, obviously fighting racism and imperialism are not the same as being mad that you have to pay taxes. The author has designed a strategy, much like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., to peacefully participate by writing a prepared letter written by the author of this book. Nothing says narcissism like comparing yourself to Gandhi. Plays the sax, too, right? Thus ends Chapter 11. Chapter 13. How to peacefully dismantle the IRS. The author of this book explains in this book how the IRS cabal is guilty of a plethora of federal crimes and violations. If were not so, the author would not have written his book. That is some circular logic, Barry. Also, we are in Chapter 13. Why are you still explaining what this book will tell us? Just get on with it already. Thus ends Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Source of IRS background and beginnings. Barry has started defining words in the text, but they're words I think most readers would know, like hypocrisy and charlatan. He says that the fact that the IRS won't debate him about the legality of taxes is a denial of due process. I think that's the term Barry should have looked up. He also keeps referring to the letter with the questions in it as an ultimatum, but he hasn't proposed any consequences. Thus ends Chapter 14. Chapter 16. We have a serious and urgent problem in the USA. Gee, I wonder what it could be. The focus of this chapter is on warning us about what terrible things will happen if we don't rid ourselves of the IRS. Barry compares himself to the prophet Isaiah. Again, the author speaks like the prophet Isaiah did to the ancient city of Jerusalem, who warned the people if they did not repent and change their ways, they would be destroyed by the king of Babylon. In the Bible, Babylon was destroyed because the people were worshipping idols. So I guess Barry's comparing the IRS to false idols? Maybe? I don't know, but he implies that some kind of crisis, or possibly even the collapse of the US, will occur if we don't get rid of the IRS. This is not unlike the apocalypse Lori was obsessed with. In fact, it fits perfectly into the times of turmoil that Chad was warning about in his terrible books. Thus ends Chapter 16. Chapter 17. The Ugly Truth. The ugly truth is that federal income taxes will lead to socialism, which Barry believes is evil. He also confuses it with communism, totalitarianism, and authoritarianism, because he doesn't actually know what any of these concepts mean, so he can't tell them apart. Then he throws in some states' rights stuff and complains about American soldiers fighting in foreign wars. But we, as a nation, have been hypnotized and bamboozled by cunning scoundrels within our own federal and state governments. We have unwittingly allowed the invasion of a despotic conglomerate enemy to infiltrate our government and rob the people of their money, property, and rights, which are supposed to be inalienable. He's starting to sound pretty paranoid, and some of the references he brings in are, at best, tangentially related to the subject. For example, immediately after the last quote I read, he writes, "The popular American song, 'When Will I Be Loved?' contains the lyrics, 'I've been cheated, I've been mistreated, when will I be loved?' In truth, the American public has been lied to, cheated, and mistreated by the IRS criminal organization since 1913. Was the text enhanced or the argument supported by this song lyric? Not really. The idea of asking when the IRS is finally going to love us doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there are quite a few instances of Barry using SUL language when it isn't necessary. I'm thinking of his belief that the IRS is an incestuous coupling of the branches of government, and that the IRS has an erotic self-interest. Here's another example. Narcissistic, having an excessive or erotic interest in oneself or cause. It is a personality disorder which IRS officials and rank-and-file employees have in abundance. So Barry wants IRS employees to stop being so erotically interested in themselves and instead focus their loving on the American people. Ooh, baby. He also accused one of the judges in his traffic ticket case of having narcissistic personality disorder. He actually diagnosed him on at least 3 different occasions. There have been a lot of reports of the Cox family being sexually inappropriate with each other, at least verbally. Megan Connor says there were a lot of sexual jokes, that the children always knew more about their parents' private lives than was appropriate. Not to mention that Alex Cox's first wife left him after a year because of his relationship with Lori and how it creeped her out. She said there was a great deal of touching and a lot of innuendo. It sounds like talking and joking about S is part of the Cox family culture, and I think that's coming through in Barry's ideas about the IRS. Thus ends Chapter 17. Chapter 21. Is the IRS an authorized member of the Department of the Treasury? Barry introduces a whole new conspiracy theory, and it's a doozy. History show, coincidentally, that in 1913, Federal Reserve Act, that three American Yahtzees, Helen and E. Clifton Barton, along with Lawrence Echevarria, incorporated the Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Service as a private Delaware corporation. This is a theory I'd never heard before. Barry assures the reader we can verify this for ourselves using a Google search. So I tried. I found 2 websites that mentioned this, both of which used nearly the exact same wording as Barry did. One, geopolitics.co, has a banner with the incredible motto, Covert Geopolitics. Nothing is as it seems, nor is it otherwise. It's just baffling. If it isn't what it seems, and it's also not what it isn't seeming, I don't know what that means. I don't know what to make of that. That particular website provides evidence that the IRS is a corporation in the form of incorporation papers for an accounting firm called Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Services Incorporated, which was neither owned nor operated by the government, and which was incorporated in 1933, not 1913. I assume Barry misread the date, but I also have yet to see any evidence that the people who ran this business were Yahtzees, which both sites claim. Barry also connects this company starting up in Delaware with Delaware being Joe Biden's home state, which feels like just a bit of a stretch. The facts, however, show that the income tax money, revenue, collected by this foreign enemy, IRTAS, covertly sent collected tax money by secret conduit to Germany to fund the Yahtzee military buildup for World War I, 1914. Can you say flabbergasted? Say what? Yes, it really happened. Note, as horrible as this sounds, the reader only needs search the records to see the historical fact. Note, nobody can make this stuff up, folks. This allegation is either true or it is a utter fantasy. I couldn't find any evidence of this, and it makes no sense because the business wasn't incorporated until 1933, at which point World War I was long over, in addition to which there were no Yahtzees prior to World War I. Apparently someone did, in fact, make this stuff up, folks. I've been fascinated by the Daybell case for a long time now, as I know most of you have been. And one particular moment that I find especially fascinating is Alex Cox's statement. Actually, he was Alex Pastenis by then. Did you all know he took Zulema's last name when they got married? Another interesting tidbit. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time pondering Alex's statement to Zulema after he realized Chad and Lori were going to throw him under the bus. He said to her, "Either I am a man of God or I am not." I believe that was the day before he died, and it's one of the things that make me suspect he took his own life with whatever pills he'd bought in Mexico. This line from Barry, "This allegation is either true or it is a utter fantasy," sounds very much like Alex's statement, "Either I am a man of God or I am not." It could be coincidence, but most children learn to speak by mimicking their parents and older siblings, and I wonder if Alex phrased his sentence using a construction he'd heard his father use many times. I've now heard both Alex and Lori in the way Barry writes. It's not really surprising, it's just interesting But it is noteworthy that the construction Barry appears to have passed down to Alex demonstrates that absolute black and white thinking. It's either true or it's an utter fantasy. There's no middle ground left open to the possibility that part of the story is true. Although in this particular case, it sounds like the story is a utter fantasy. Barry makes more outlandish claims and repeatedly encourages the reader to confirm these facts by looking at websites. But the websites either don't say what he claims they do, or they've been taken down. And even if those issues didn't exist, these aren't the sorts of websites where you get reliable, factual information. Some were so sketchy that Firefox told me to turn back. This is the actual homepage of one of them. Does this look like a reliable source? I wouldn't trust a weather report from this site. Thus ends Chapter 21. Chapter 23. Unjust Politicians and Government Corruption. The focus of this chapter is on how God created America to safeguard the doctrine of the Christian faith, belief in God and the Savior Jesus Christ, and give reverence to God's 10 Commandments. Here's more of that Tim Ballard influence showing through. And then we get into the anti-Muslim stuff. An abundant amount of incontrovertible evidence proves the various departments of the deferral government, including the IRS, are infiltrated by cunning enemies within the USA, Islam being the main culprit which has targeted the USA since 1795. I have no idea what he's talking about, and he makes no attempt to explain. He just drops this hateful little paragraph into the book and moves on. Tax patriots, or paladins. What is a paladin? Anyone who fights hard for something they believe in can be called a paladin. While the French word paladin means warrior, as time went on, its meaning grew to include any chivalrous or heroic person. The basic principles defining a paladin are to defend and protect the innocent and uphold the law. They would defend truth and justice against the unending evil as it approaches. This part just cracked me up. The only context I have for paladins is Dungeons & Dragons. I'm really curious if that's where Barry learned of them. He's going to spend the rest of the book referring to tax protesters as paladins, and I'm going to spend the rest of the book imagining a man in plate mail marching into IRS headquarters, brandishing a long sword and shouting an incantation to get his deductions approved. Thus ends Chapter 23. Chapter 24. An enemy hath done this. It would be fair to say our great nation has been infected with a virulent symbolical tapeworm called the Internal Revenue Service. This type of parasitic worm in biology is identified in the class called flatworm phylum. This invading organism has 20,000 species, and when humans are infected by this extremely harmful and toxic hostile flatworm, the result is fatal. Once this worm infiltrates a biological victim, it never quits until it has destroyed the host. The IRS is symbolic to the flat or tapeworm, which infects its victim and sucks the lifeblood from its victims. If the tapeworm is a metaphor, why does he bother giving us taxonomic and biological details? Incorrect details, by the way. Tapeworms don't suck blood, and tapeworm infections are easily treated and rarely fatal in humans. In fact, some unwise people have tried to buy tapeworms online in order to infect themselves and lose weight. Don't do that. Not only is the fatal tapeworm infection metaphor inaccurate, but it implies that paying taxes will kill us. You're taking your life in your hands every time you file. Rebellious teens are using fake IDs to buy TurboTax. I think Lori inherited her flair for the dramatic from her father. Thus ends Chapter 24. Chapter 26. Is the information in this book too good to be true? Yes, and that ought to tell Barry something, but it apparently doesn't. We are dealing with a 100-year-old government regime who has imaginary power that even scares the hell out of other federal government employees. To be sure, the government officials involved in the IRS cabal are composed of dubious characters who have been deceived and who unconscionably published fake tax laws. These unique individuals are charlatans who probably couldn't find a job doing honest work anywhere in the private non-government employment. So, these hooligans were recruited by the IRS to collect taxes for the cabal. The reader has known many such persons, which prompt this definition of the IRS employees. Barry personifies both the government and the IRS throughout this book. He does so here in the first line when he describes the government as who. The government isn't a who, it's a what. But Barry keeps talking about it like it's a person with whom he has personal beef. My guess is that he's conflated the IRS with individual IRS employees with whom he's interacted. And the rest of this quote makes clear exactly what he thinks of them. Dubious characters, unique individuals, he seems to think that's an insult, and hooligans, which he kindly defines. Hooligan, a young or uneducated troublemaker, typically one of a gang. The entire IRS cabal consists of hooligan personalities. These include rank-and-file office employees, revenue officers, special agents of the DOJ Civil and Criminal Investigation Division, and government lawyers, litigators, who have been recruited and instructed to violate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in their pursuit of tax money. These gullible employees of the IRS cabal swallow hook, line, and sinker all miscreate information. Barry includes dozens of definitions like this, often of familiar words like hooligan. It's incredibly condescending, and hilarious in this case, because if he had bothered to look up miscreate in the dictionary, he might have realized that the word he meant to use was miscreant, which means depraved or faithless. He incorrectly uses miscreate over and over, more times than I can count. Like most sovcits, Barry thinks he knows more than everyone else, and I see this in Lori too. I noticed during her post-conviction interview with Brianna, who really seems to understand how to draw Lori out, that Lori kept trying to educate her about how the legal system works, which was pretty bold given that Lori had just lost a case after representing herself. That doesn't seem to have fazed her at all. And guess who else has represented himself? Barry. Sovcits almost always represent themselves in court because they believe that accepting representation from a lawyer is the same as contracting with the government. And if they contract with the government, then they would have to follow its laws. Besides, they understand the laws better than anyone else anyway, just the same way that Lori and Chad understand religion and spirituality better than anyone else. Another idea she alluded to in the interview. I'm going to have to use some euphemisms while reading this next section. These IRS personnel have a reputation of spending millions of taxpayer dollars doing things such as vacationing in exotic locations and paying large sums of money on luxury hotels, expensive foods, clothing, entertainment, fun and games, and spending the government's money on extreme immoral pleasures in foreign vacation destinations, including paying exorbitant sums of money on ladies of the night, booze, and candy, etc. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Really? Aren't most IRS personnel accountants and data entry types? Fun fact, I was briefly enrolled in a master's program in forensic accounting. I did one semester, realized that the more I learned about finance, the more depressing I found the world, and quit. But I'll tell you, no one with whom I interacted at any time during my accounting education struck me as the type who went on exotic foreign locations. Frankly, this whole paragraph sounds like projection. People who know Barry say that he and Janice go on frequent vacations to Hawaii and Vegas, and he was arrested for solicitation. Megan says Barry loves flashy cars. He apparently owned part of stock in a racehorse. Alex Cox went to Mexico to buy unidentified pills just a few weeks before he died, and he was known to take South American vacations to hook up with women. I don't know if it's true that the women were underage, but this description Barry has written sounds more like the behavior of his own family than it does the behavior of IRS employees. Thus ends Chapter 26. Chapter 27. When will the American public take control of an out-of-control IRS? It should be obvious to the reader of this book that the powers that control the federal government within the deep state are a cauldron of corruption, influenced by misguided opinions among demagogues who do not pledge their allegiance to the American flag or pledge allegiance to anything. My God, they aren't pledging their allegiance to anything? Loyalty tests is on my list of red flags. Testing people's loyalty was a central theme in Chad Daybell's writing, and it's an idea that I found myself thinking about a lot over the last few years. Loyalty is the secular counterpart to faithfulness, and we know how important his faith is to Barry. It isn't surprising that loyalty is also important to him, as it is to many people, but here he's implying that people who aren't loyal to anything are evil, because the IRS is evil. The more I think about this quote, the more interesting I find it, because there's something fundamentally irrational about loyalty, or at least it can become irrational very quickly. It's the idea that we'll remain faithful to a person or an institution or an idea, regardless of whether or not those are good reasons. It's very similar to faith, to believing things without evidence, and people seem to take a great deal of pride in this. I haven't quite figured out why yet. Thus ends chapter 28. Chapter 29. What does the published law say about the collection of tax? Although he's still intermittently telling us what this book will prove, Barry seems to feel that he can finally get into the meat of his argument. This chapter contains lists of sections in the tax code that he feels the reader should examine, that he thinks prove his point, and I'm just going to break down one example to show you that none of this lines up. Whether willfully or inadvertently, Barry has misunderstood this. IRC Section 7701, Definitions, or Section 77011, Person. The term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, i.e. business officer, a trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. The term person, as used by employees of the Internal Revenue Service, as defined in the IRC of 1986, as amended, means an individual business entity, such as a partnership or corporation or government organization, and is used simultaneously with the term person and is often used interchangeably to mean the same thing, i.e. person, individual, or taxpayer. Note the significant difference between the IRC's text and Barry's interpretation. The IRC says an individual, such as a business officer. Officer is a person. Barry changes that to individual business entity. That is a completely different thing. A person and a business entity aren't the same. But this is the quote he's using to justify his claim that people aren't taxpayers. This is it. There are two possible explanations. One is that Barry misread the IRC. That's possible. Based on the enormous number of typos in this book, I don't think Barry even reread it once before publishing it. That suggests to me a lack of attention to detail, and you'd think that he wouldn't want to put his name on something in such bad shape, but a lot of people do, and my impression is that they're often people who simply don't care about details and might not even register them. However, I'm disinclined to go with that interpretation because he's obviously read large portions of the IRC, if not the entire thing, and I would expect that the error in his understanding would become more and more glaring the more he read. This isn't the only place in the IRC where this would come up. But also, I ended up reading a lot of the tax codes he lists in this chapter, and when I looked this one up, I discovered that the words business officer, in parentheses, are Barry's addition. He does this often. He inserts commentaries into quotations using parentheses. Normally, one would employ brackets for that, and also limit themselves to editorial notes instead of the kinds of distorted interpretations Barry often includes. But like I said, details don't seem to be especially important to him. The actual quote from the IRC is, the term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, a trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. That's pretty straightforward. It's hard for me to buy that Barry misread it and then refused to pay taxes, lost his house, went to prison, and wrote a book about his incorrect understanding without rereading that section carefully a couple more times. In fact, I'd wager he had a number of heated arguments with IRS employees in which they tried to explain to him that he was reading it incorrectly, and he refused to accept that. Because if he accepts it, that means he's a taxpayer. Can you say motivated reasoning? All references to IRC sections above are statutes that pertain to the term taxable income and refer to individuals or persons as defined. Only those who qualify as a person or an individual are considered by operation of law to be a taxpayer. It's just that simple. Yes, it is that simple. You're an individual and a person and a taxpayer, Barry. I want to mention, too, that a suspicious number of the sections Barry instructs the reader to look at either don't exist or are completely irrelevant. The tax code changes every year, and there have been some major changes this year, so I can't say for certain that this is deliberate, but it's really suspicious. He writes 3 paragraphs in all caps, each of them organized around the rhetorical device that I noticed Alex shared with him, the either-or construction. This confirms to me that Barry frequently uses this device, and it always ends with a punchy, or they are not. Ultimately, I don't think it helps him. You never want to point out that you could be wrong when your argument is based on smoke and mirrors. Belief in and faith in God, the creator of the universe, were the reasons the founding fathers adopted the Christian principles and ideals of living in a peaceful society. The doctrines given by Jesus Christ to love one another as he loved us is the last, best, and only hope of mankind on the planet Earth going forward. Thus, to eradicate evil from the American society, the IRS regime and criminal organization must be dismantled. The current environment in the USA is stained with malicious and satanic influence, which has caused the ruination of many cherished principles called truth, justice, and the American way. Nothing says love them like Jesus did, like accusing people of being under the influence of Satan. I think Barry was also walking in Christ's footsteps when he wrote, "Can the reader say Barack Obama without vomiting?" Followed 2 paragraphs later by, "It is a big lie of Satan to deceive everyone into believing Americans should hate their fellow citizens because of political philosophy." I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I suspect Barry lacks the ability to self-reflect. Thus ends chapter 29. Chapter 31, Paradigm Shift. Barry spends a while ranting about how federal employees are just like the Yahtzees. He touches several times on how IRS employees are using pseudonyms to escape accountability for their evil deeds, which surprised me because I had no idea IRS employees were allowed to use pseudonyms. Turns out they can, if they're being harassed or threatened. I'll leave it to you to imagine exactly how Barry might have discovered that. This next quote requires no context. "Isn't that a form of masochism?" I couldn't resist. Even if you aren't going to pay to get your book edited before you self-publish, at least run the spell check. He also misspells Jehovah. His friends call him Joe. Thus ends the first of 2 chapter 31s. Chapter 31, The Great Plan of Deception. Word of advice to writers. When you're writing a book, don't bother numbering the chapters. Just write chapter and then a title if you want one, and move on, because you're going to edit and add and subtract, and you will spend several years of your life renumbering chapters if you try to number them from the start. Finish the book, do your editing, then number the chapters. You go through once and you're done. The title of this chapter 31, The Great Plan of Deception, is a play on the plan of salvation, which in Mormon theology is God's plan to save humanity from sin. When Jesus and his brother Lucifer fought over how to save humanity, Jesus won, and the plan of salvation is the one he implemented. I assume that the implication is that the great plan of deception was Lucifer's plan. After getting Emperor Hirohito's given name wrong, Barry writes, "The IRS cabal refuses to admit the evidence that the 16th Amendment was never ratified, because if they admitted this truth, it would be the end of the IRS. The unverified claim by Philander Knox proves the American public have been deceived by the IRS cabal. To be sure, the irrefutable evidence proves Mr. Philander Knox, the Secretary of State of the United States in 1913, was not a credible person, and his signed document was bogus and evidence of perjury." There are loads of photographs of Mr. Philander Knox, and he looks deeply depressed in every one of them. He's straight out of the first half of an antidepressant commercial. But that's par for the course when you work for Satan. As history proves, Secretary of State Mr. Philander Knox was like a paid informant for the government. In truth, the available documents of this 1913 event remain in the archives of the United States for all the world to see. The reader can submit a request under FOIA to have a copy. The documents show they comprise an ambiguous scribbling of dubious signatures which have been doctored to appear authentic but are in fact fraud. To be certain, the reader has been correctly warned that these bogus alleged ratification documents do not prove that 38 states actually signed the required documents to validate the event. The states that did sign were California, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Oklahoma. What does it mean to be like a paid informant for the government? I don't know what Barry was trying to imply. Knox worked for the government. He was a senator. He was Secretary of State. There was nothing covert about his job for the government. As for the rest of this quote, the ambiguous scribbling of dubious signatures is all Barry has for evidence. That's it. That's all the evidence he provides that the 16th Amendment wasn't ratified. He saw the signatures, he thought they looked phony, probably because handwriting standards and styles have changed dramatically over the last 100 years, and he concluded that he didn't have to pay taxes. Thus ends the second chapter 31. Chapter 32. What does it take to expose evil? Definition of an IRS practitioner who has been brainwashed. A disturbed, abnormal human being who is willing to be systematically indoctrinated and coerced into adopting radical and unlawful IRS propaganda, to conform thinking and adopt blind obedience and loyalty to an evil cause that is unlawful and harmful to fellow human beings. Setting aside the question of what an IRS practitioner is, I don't think a person can be willingly brainwashed. Actually, I take that back, because Lori definitely was. Then we get to one of the very, very few personal details regarding the author. The author, as a former law school student, was never offered a course in IRS propaganda or given the opportunity to learn about the IRS as a radical and illegal entity that is not connected to the Department of the Treasury by operation of law. Like I said earlier, I couldn't confirm this. I'm taking Barry at his word that he once attended law school. Based on the way he phrased this, it sounds like he didn't graduate, and there's no shame in that. I'm not ashamed that I quit my forensic accounting program. But it does cast this book in an interesting light. I think a lot of us carry a torch for the path we almost took, or took part way. I mean, I've watched every video CoffeeZilla has ever put out. Gosha and I love Patrick Boyle. But there's a difference between staying tangentially connected to a profession you once considered and claiming that you understand it better than the people actually practicing it. So when we look at Lori representing herself in court, it isn't mysterious why. Her dad didn't go to law school, and he's a lawyer. She doesn't need to go to law school to be a lawyer either. I'm curious if Barry flunked out or was expelled or just decided not to continue. If he does have schizophrenia, that often manifests in early adulthood, so it's possible he got sick and had to withdraw. Megan Connor suggested that he was busy making bank selling insurance at that age, though, and Citrus Belt Law School seemed to cater to non-traditional students. All of that makes me think he attended later in life. But he quit going for some reason. If he flunked out or was expelled, that would make me wonder if he's got a touch of the Jody Hildebrandt rebellion. Jody likely became a psychologist to prove all the psychologists who diagnosed her wrong. If Barry flunked out or was expelled, it seems possible that he then pretended to be a lawyer to prove this school wrong, that he was smart enough or simply right about whatever he had likely argued with his professors about. That's just a theory, though, because I don't know why he didn't graduate, although this book does provide some ideas there as well. My understanding is that lawyers need very strong reading and writing skills. This is called tyranny. This is called fascism. This is called unconstitutional. This is called evil. This is called treason. This is called despotism. This is called totalitarianism. This is called evil. This is called criminal behavior. Two evils. Two evils and two Chapter 31s and two members of the same family who don't have law licenses but act as their own lawyers. Thus ends Chapter 32. Chapter 33. The IRS regime laughs all the way to the federal bank every April 15th. That is kind of a funny joke. The term insane best describes the IRS, which is they are in a state of mind which prevents normal perception, behavior, or social interactions, caused by serious mental illness, mentally disordered, certifiably psychotic, or schizophrenic. So is this actual projection? Why else would the IRS commit crimes against the American people unless they were crazy? UIS tyranny, cruelty, and despotism upon innocent people are signs of insanity. The IRS cabal employs crazy people off the street to enforce their criminal policies and bad behavior upon the American public. This is not only crazy, but it is unconstitutional. It must be eliminated. Why else would the IRS commit crimes against the American people unless they were crazy? Like, for money? Let's say Barry's right and the IRS is a criminal organization. The obvious motive would be money. They're pulling in billions of dollars. Why doesn't this seem obvious to Barry? Why does he focus on the idea that IRS employees are insane? Is he trying to be insulting? Is it projection? He includes a memo that was supposedly written by the IRS director in 1985. In it, the director secretly informs IRS leadership that a recent court loss meant that every penny of federal income tax ever paid is available to be refunded because the 16th Amendment was never ratified. And even USA Today has reported that this memo is a fraud. This is from their article about it. IRS spokesperson Janelle Hunter called the document a forgery in a 1993 news article about it from the Daily Herald newspaper in Provo, Utah. Larry Beecraft, the attorney in the case referenced in the memo, who was mistakenly identified in it as Lowell Beercraft, also told the Daily Herald the document was a forgery, stating that he tried to argue that the 16th Amendment was not valid but lost the case. He also pointed out that the memo gave the wrong first name for the U.S. attorney prosecuting the case, Roger Duncan. Either Barry is the most gullible man on earth, or he's mentally ill. Or he's just a liar, or more likely all three. Thus ends Chapter 33. Chapter 34. It is now time to talk about how the IRS cabal, secret cadre, takes care of their own gangster members. I have never seen brackets used within a title. Not once. Chapter 34 is the last chapter in this book, but it isn't the end of the book. It's also easily the longest chapter in the book. I'm not going to go into it in depth because it's more of the same. Barry compares the IRS to the mafia. He quotes obscure anti-tax books no one has ever heard of with titles like, "Is the System Rigged? You betcha!" He directs the reader to sections of the IRC. He misspells Barack Obama's name. It's like a going-away tour. He wants to play all his greatest hits. In time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Political language involves everything. It is designed to usurp power for a few, elite, and make lies sound truthful. The most obvious constitutional facts are not welcomed by those in power, IRS, DOJ, federal judges. Nationalism, or globalism, is the lust for absolute power tempered by self-deception. Can you say Hillary Clinton? Can you say IRS? Can you say Barack Obama? Can you say Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer? Can you say Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin? How did Rasputin get involved in this? Did he help set up the IRS in Puerto Rico based on the ideas promulgated by the Yahtzees? Sorry, I've hit my limit. Seriously, though, this paragraph is incoherent. If I didn't know that Barry had reportedly been diagnosed with a mental illness, this paragraph would make me wonder. Even if you fix all the misspellings and the typos and you correct all the names, it makes no sense. Nationalism and globalism aren't the same thing. They're actually opposites. And how can a lust for absolute power be tempered by self-deception? I can't make heads or tails of what he's trying to say. Usually I can glean something, but not this time. Barry's attempt to communicate has failed utterly. Then it's back to the greatest hits. He quotes Orwell. He quotes Shakespeare. And then he has to explain how the quote is relevant because it isn't at all obvious. He defines employee. He quotes the Old Testament. He says that if you ask the IRS to answer your questions and they direct you to one of their publications, that's a sure sign you aren't a taxpayer. He again makes the outlandish claim that sending this letter will work. Note, the people who have proven this strategy and are now free from IRS bondage once were like the reader now in bondage, and were once victims and in bondage to tyrannical IRS forces of evil as the reader is today. It's interesting that he doesn't identify as one of those people. If those among the American population today in 2019 envy those who are already free from IRS oppression and bondage, and if they want to achieve the same freedom from the illegality and lawlessness of IRS propaganda, all that is needed is for the reader to participate in writing a letter addressed to the IRS cabal as provided in this book. The reader needs to have a willing mind and heart to face the IRS enemy Goliath known as the IRS. The freedom from IRS despotism is attained by confronting the IRS cabal and shining the light of truth in their face to embarrass and shame them into admitting their guilt and into oblivion. I like the religious appeal. It distracts from the blatant lies. I actually considered printing the letter out and mailing it to the IRS just to see what would happen, but Gosha told me I'd probably end up on a list, and I don't want to deal with an audit, so I guess I am living in terror of the IRS after all. Remember also, this proven strategy has already successfully worked with just a few Americans who have been fed up with the evil IRS regime. He keeps saying this, but I can't imagine he believes it. That brings me back to the suspicion that he's trying to set himself up as a guru for people who don't want to pay taxes. And then, he finally gives us the letter. Back in chapter 2, he said we only had to ask 2 questions. Those 2 questions have now blown up into a 10-page letter with an addendum that must be 5 or 6 pages. If you send this letter, you will absolutely end up on a list. Anyone who sends this letter is going to be labeled a crackpot or worse. Barry even writes, "My questions are not old, worn-out, frivolous, illegal tax protester allegations which the federal judiciary have rejected. Except they are. They absolutely are. I looked into this. I did my due diligence. The federal judiciary has rejected all of this. Thus ends chapter 34. Okay, almost done. I can get through this. Epilogue. The epilogue contains a list of thanks Barry wishes to offer. First, he thanks the books he read as a teenager. Then some books he read as an adult. Not the authors of the books. He thanks the books themselves. Then he thanks his mission president from when he served his mission in 1973. He thanks the Bible, his grandmother, Joseph Smith, a number of poets, Janine Pirro, his dad, tax protesters in general, William Tyndale, and Jesus. And then he just kind of keeps going. The author now, in 2019-2020, after 50 years of investigating the IRS, unravels what most people would consider a conglomerate matrix or mythical government jargon which is utterly inexplicable. This book is intended for the American public to understand what it means to be a non-taxpayer and to know with assurance what class of people the IRC is intended to apply. What does that mean? I feel like his use of capital letters here is meant to imply something I can't quite catch. There's also an elitist attitude, demonstrated by his claim that he's managed to decipher the conglomerate matrix, by which I assume he means the tax code, because he's smarter than everyone else. It is now necessary for the author to quote the distinguished and fearless trial attorney or barrister referenced in this book, Lowell Larry B. Craft, aka Lawrence B. Craft of Huntsville, Alabama. No, it's not necessary. Don't do it. You can quit. I quit. I only read the first half of that sentence because I can't take anymore. There's a whole second half. And the worst part is, he doesn't even quote Mr. B. Craft. He gives a summary of B. Craft's thoughts as interpreted by the author. And he goes on for pages and pages. There are subsections. He quotes the infamous Jimmy Carter. Infamous as what? A really nice, mild-mannered man who wanted to help homeless people but was kind of a crummy president? He quotes the codes. He cites legal cases. Then he writes instructions for the readers. We are way past the point of instructions. And then he includes a list of relevant statutes and regulations, followed by a persuasive essay aimed at convincing people to send the letter. He actually instructs the reader to stop paying their taxes. And then he throws in some additional instructions, more offices he wants the reader to harass with 15-page letters. And then finally, the epilogue is over. But the book's not. Now it's time for the summary. I don't know if the summary is technically its own chapter or not, but it's set apart in the text with the title like it is, so I'm treating it like one. Need the author of How the American Public Can Dismantle the IRS need say anything more? Sorry for the repeats over and over again, but the author wants everyone to understand the gravity of this debacle. The term in law which says res ipsa loquitur, or the thing speaks for itself, applies here. No, it doesn't. If it did, you wouldn't have written 400 pages about it. Then there's a section, within the summary apparently, titled Summation. Barry really wants to be a lawyer. The summation begins by defining freedom, then immediately includes a copyright notice for the book. Not on the copyright page. There is no copyright page. He includes the copyright halfway through the summation. Barry explains that he wrote the book for the benefit of Americans who have been assigned tax identification numbers, and then finally explains what he's been trying to tell us for the last 400 pages. The Constitution of the United States, written by the Founding Fathers, was inspired by God and is obvious to all who understand the majesty and necessity of maintaining three functions of government into separate executive, legislative, and judicial departments, each having specific delegated powers which protects the people's rights against tyranny and preserves liberty. This form of government helps the people maintain control of these powers. The Founding Fathers believed the separation of powers were not simply preferences for their own day, 1776, but were truths that the sovereign and moral people of America could always rely on as guides in their pursuit of happiness through ordered liberty and the religious application of the rule of law. The end. Thank God, all my questions have finally been answered. Thus ends the summary. But not the book! Because if you thought Barry was finished repeating himself, you'd be wrong. Now we have the postscript. Normally, a postscript is a brief piece of text you dash off at the end of a larger piece of text. When you write PS at the end of a letter, that stands for postscript. Personally, I started writing out postscript in full some years ago. Makes me feel fancy. But I've never seen a postscript like the one Barry hits us with here. He might as well have just added a 35th chapter. He goes right back into the same rant as the first 34 chapters. Be aware, America's cherished Constitution is hanging by a thread in 2020, and to cast out the devil of the IRS, it will require first and foremost an informed and engaged citizenry. The idea that the Constitution is hanging by a thread is one I discussed in my series on Chad Daybell's books. It comes from something known as the White Horse Prophecy, and it states that the Constitution will hang by a thread and the Mormons will save America. It is a fraudulent prophecy, but I think Chad and Barry, and I'm sure Lori, believe it. Then we get this brief historical note. Remember, this book came out in 2020. On Monday, July 1st, 2019, President Donald Trump signed into law a bill with bipartisan support that would force greater accountability on the IRS when dealing with property seizures, while also protecting taxpayers from identity theft, strengthening whistleblower protections, and modernizing the nation's alleged tax collection agency. This legislation is called the Taxpayer First Act. President Trump said, "It streamlines so many other changes needed in the IRS." Sorry, I can't really do impressions. The author of this book says, "Nice try, Mr. President, but the IRS is an illegal and criminal organization that must be dismantled. You can't streamline a false federal agency that is corrupt from top to bottom." I'm sure President Trump has made a serious study of this volume. I hear he loves reading.
I pray that Trump has some knowledge enough to train you guys on the Constitution.
Then there's more ranting about how the IRS will fall apart if you send the letter because they can't handle the truth. And Barry attempts to give us a real-life example of this happening. I removed some of the identifying information here to avoid doxing this poor IRS employee. IRS capitulation example. Author received a letter dated 5/15/2019 from IRS Revenue Officer Lori, last name, IRS Employee ID number, located at address in Arizona. The letter was in response to the author's request to have a meeting with the IRS officials to include a U.S. congressman and a DOJ member of the Civil Tax Division to answer specific questions about the origin of the IRS and the lack of any statute in the IRC or elsewhere requiring non-taxpayers to file and pay a federal income tax to the IRS. For certain, the IRS is not an official member of the Department of the Treasury as a matter of law. Lori, last name, sent prepared letter 3175 from the IRS catalog number 26859J. Federal courts have consistently ruled the arguments you have made. Therefore, we will not respond to future correspondence concerning these issues, questions you want answered. Did he deliberately omit the word against in this quotation from the letter? Federal courts have consistently ruled against the arguments you have made? Because they have. How is this capitulation? Miss Lori, last name, told Barry he was wrong and that the courts have ruled against him repeatedly. How is that capitulation? Is Barry reading something other than what was written? Also, I have to note that he apparently demanded a meeting with a congressman and a DOJ representative. Why did he think he was entitled to that? So let it be written. So let it be done. Let us, as Americans, protect our liberty and abolish or terminate the evil and criminal organization of the IRS cabal, which is unconstitutional on its face. The answer is not legislative streamlining or another tax reform. The answer and only solution is to dismantle the IRS by the will and voice of the American people. Barry L. Cox, author, How the American Public Can Dismantle the IRS. Thus ends How the American Public Can Dismantle the IRS. Finally. That brings us to our final questions. First, what could have been done to improve this book? There are so many problems with this book that I don't know where to begin. I think I once talked about planners and pantsers. Planners are writers who plan before they start writing. Pantsers write by the seat of their pants, making it all up as they go along. Although you can be a pantser and write nonfiction, it's a writing style that lends itself to narrative nonfiction. With a book like this, it makes much more sense to have an outline, or at least a list of points you want to make. Barry didn't have a list of points. It feels like what he had was a vendetta, and he sat down and ranted into his computer. Frankly, there's so little actual content in this book that it probably could have been a long blog post. There was no justification for making it what Amazon estimates would be 412 pages. Far worse than the length, though, are the lies. Or the delusions. I'm still not 100% sure which. I'm leaning toward lying, though. It is irresponsible to publish lies that could get your reader sent to prison. Telling readers not to pay their taxes? I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like there could potentially be some legal liability for Barry there. Even if it is legal, it's not being a good person, and it certainly isn't being a good Christian. Good Christians don't lie to each other about their legal tax obligations. What have we learned about Barry from reading this book? Barry, like many disingenuous Christians, thanks Jesus in his acknowledgments, but ignores what Jesus actually said. Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Matthew 22:21. This was literally in response to a question about paying taxes. I don't know why Barry ignores this fact, other than that he chooses not to believe anything that doesn't support his position, and that position is that taxes are illegal. And clearly, he is entrenched in that position. Most sovcits are. Realizing that Barry is a conspiracy theorist was what first got me interested in this book, because I realized that he raised a daughter who, eventually, married a conspiracy theorist. One of the questions I've heard a lot is, what did Lori see in Chad? Well, partly she saw her daddy. She saw a man who believed in exactly the same kinds of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories her father believes in. And we're now seeing her voice conspiracy theories in court. In the pretrial hearing before her last trial, she repeatedly tried to imply that there was some conspiracy between the Arizona police and the Idaho police and poor Nate Eaton to get her convicted of killing Charles. Say what you will, she comes by that type of thinking honestly. The core of the sovcit movement is a belief that the rules don't apply to certain people, certain smarter, more clever people. You see this thinking in Lori very clearly. She's exalted. She can sin without having to repent. People have claimed that Lori would do whatever she wanted and then excuse herself by saying, "Doesn't count for me." Lori doesn't need to wear garments. Lori can drink. Lori doesn't have to repent. Exceptionalism is fundamentally dangerous, and it's incorrect. We are equal in the eyes of God, and we should be equal under the law. Lori and Barry don't believe that. This entire book is evidence of that. Gosha and I have been talking a lot about the idea that some people will trust their guts over their minds. To some extent, this is encouraged in Mormonism. that burning in the bosom, that belief in continuing revelation, the idea that God is speaking to us in subtle, knowing ways, is pretty core to Mormon doctrine. And it exists in some form in every religion and every spiritual practice. And in most people, it's a beautiful thing. My spiritual teacher teaches something very similar. She says to get quiet and go into your deep heart and listen. She talks about a deep blue channel of wisdom. But I think that after you center yourself and listen, after you receive guidance from God or your higher self or your spirit guides, however you conceptualize it, then you have to let your mind weigh in. You have to double check that what your deep heart tells you is sane and sensible and won't hurt other people and aligns with reality. And you have to do that because Spirit speaks to us through our imagination. That's the vehicle. I was teaching energetic self-care once at a feminist retreat back in, 2006. And I remember telling the women, remember that the imagination is a free-for-all bus. Yes, spiritual wisdom rides it. But so do a lot of other things, including our fears and obsessions and lower impulses. And we have to use our brains to say, this doesn't track with what I know about the world. We have to ferret out the passengers on the bus who aren't coming from a good place. I don't think that Barry or Lori understands that. And I can say with some confidence that mental illness reduces our ability to filter the information coming from our imaginations. Sometimes our imaginations tell us what we want to hear. Sometimes they tell us what we're scared of. Barry believes he's smarter than everyone else. He's part of the top 5%. He's smarter and more attractive and probably more spiritual than everyone else. The idea of being better than other people is something that I've been told is very Mormon. And I believe it, but I think it's rooted in the idea of American exceptionalism. It's rooted in the belief that this country is special and different, and that the founded fathers were guided by God to create a perfect country. I talked to my mom about this because she was very much raised with the belief that America was exceptional. And she told me she grew up thinking that we had the best people and the best schools and the best medicine and the best military. None of that is true. And that's sad. That's disappointing. It doesn't feel good to acknowledge that. But that's reality. Every country and culture is special, just like every person is special. And every country and every person has flaws. I have a firm belief that if you love something, if you truly love it, whether it's a country or an institution or a book or even a religion, then you want it to be the best it can possibly be. And in order to make it the best it can be, you have to acknowledge its flaws. You have to fix those flaws. You can't choose to deny them or ignore them. I think it's easier to face our own flaws when we realize everyone is flawed. Every single person. There are no heroes. Even my spiritual teacher, whose name is Meredith Young Sowers, by the way, if you want to look her up. She's retired now. But I used to make careful note of when she'd make mistakes, because I wanted to remind myself that she's human, just like me. There is no top 5%. Not even for spiritual teachers or gurus or prophets. America is haunted by the ghosts of its othering, of genocide, of slavery, of racism and xenophobia and homophobia. That's hard to admit. That hurts. But if we truly want America to be everything it can be, we have to face the past. We have to correct and repair. People like Barry, who think in black and white terms, can't do that. They can't face mistakes because they believe that people are either perfect or gutter trash, with no in between. To be a person, you have to be perfect. Everyone else is gutter trash. So if we say that America isn't perfect, we might as well be saying it's the worst country on earth. And that's not true either. We can love America and acknowledge its imperfections. We can love ourselves and acknowledge our imperfections. Lori was raised by a man who believes he's perfect. He's exceptional. He's better than other people. He's smarter than other people. He knows the law better than lawyers. He knows the tax code better than IRS employees. And she married a man who believes he's spiritually superior to everyone else and told her that she was too. None of her other husbands told her that. After 4 marriages, she finally found her chatty daddy. And yes, those are the worst words to ever come out of my mouth. Her father taught her, and Chad reinforced to her, that what she feels is true, and it's more important than any fact, and that kind of extremism reinforces itself. In fact, I almost feel like there's a bit of competition with these people and their wilder beliefs. Believing in gravity is easy. Believing in something that defies all logic and reason is evidence and proof of faith. Only the top 5% of humanity has the faith to believe things that are blatantly false. Well, that's it for this video, folks. I am getting back to work on my Visions of Glory series. I may only release 1 video a month over the summer because I have an internship in film production. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking or subscribing. Please don't reach out to anyone involved with this case who has an invited connection. And remember to use your words wisely. Thanks. By the mid-1980s, in addition to claiming that visitations? Oh, shoot. I skipped a line there. And he had he demanded that he be persecuted. Persecuted? No. Prosecuted. Yes. He demanded that he be prosecuted for his refusal to pay taxes. As soon as Porth became famous, does his claimed affirmation? What word is that? I'm not going to dedupe. Van Ballion? Is that his name? Yeah, that is his name. Why did it sound so weird? When they aren't firing the police, or when they aren't firing the police? There's a word missing there. Barry Cox was born on at least when Megan used to go to visit. Wait, where's this legal filing I'm supposed to be reading? I don't know when he got indoctrinated into sovcit. This is somewhat, frankly, wait, I've lost my place. I can't believe I'm only on page 11 of this script. To promulgate the biggest lie ever perpetuated. That doesn't say perpetuated, it says perpetrated. That is a long sentence I have to read again. Of the eternal, the eternal revenue system. Pay taxes even after you die. And he's going to fixate his attention. I don't think that's right. Or ignore buzzwords. Obviously, can you say unacceptable behavior? Joe Bannister? Is it Joe? Verified fact. Show the government the what? You gotta proofread stuff, Barry. Verified fact. Show the government. Oh, I can't read this sentence. Oh, it's so bad. Okay. Herb? I don't really know if it's herb or herb. But the websites I don't know what happened there. How many hours have I been recording at this point? Pursuit. Crap. Special agents of the DOJ civil... What is happening with my speech? When will the American public take an out... It isn't surprising that loyalty is also important to it. The term person, as used by employees of the The term person... Did I say turn? The term person, as used by employees of the... Why do I keep saying eternal? I almost did it again. Oh my god. Okay, take 4. Is it a... Oh wait, that's not a question. Masochism very well as an insurance salesman. Oh my god, I have to learn to talk. Thus ends chapter 31. 34. I don't know. The IRS cabal employees crazy people. Employees? Thus ends chapter 34. Wait, that was chapter 33. Can you say Grigoroy Yefimovich Rasputin? Grigoroy. It's Grigory. It's Grigory Yefimovich. Barry, learn how to fact check, dude. Envy those who are distracts from the federal judiciary have rejected. What is in my eye? What was that sound I just made? Worn out old There's no old there. What? Apparently I have something in my eye that makes me think I see the word old. Crap, I don't know how to pronounce that. Hopefully she's using a synonym. Synonym? Pseudonym. Crap. And a DOJ member. This is just one of those days when things are not easy.